listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across these disunited states we call America, it is time now for another edition, in fact, the last edition for a few weeks, of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events with conversation from across these corners of these states and from across the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, my goodness, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, a couple quick heads up here. For one thing, this is our last day for about a week. About a week and a half, technically, 10 days. We're going to be off. Jamarl and I are both taking vacations this next week. Then, week after that, he comes back. I'm still gone. And then the week after that, I'm back too. But just again, heads up, last show you'll hear for a little while, unless you just go through our repeats. And also, quick heads up, it is August 27th. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern. I hope everybody's having a great morning. Let's get into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, we have 187,439 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. Also, 2,212 deaths. To be honest, I pull from the New York Times with this stuff, and their reporting with the deaths was slightly weird. I had to do the math myself.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is. So the 2,212 deaths that I'm reporting, perfectly consistent with the math that I did.
Yeah.
There's also a chance that their system's just glitching slightly. So
I see.
Put a bookmark in that if that makes sense.
That's fair.
Over the past week, there have been an average of about 156,000 cases per day. That's an increase of 24% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 52% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point. 61% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. For the total stats, as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 38,552,000 people across the United States, and it's killed 634,734 people here in America. India has given at least one COVID-19 vaccine shot to more than half of the eligible population in the country. The country's health ministry said it's ramping up its vaccination drive. India currently has around 30,000 new cases a day. To the extent the numbers there can be trusted, many speculated that India's actual death count was far higher than has been officially reported. Although, 30,000 cases, if we can trust those numbers, even if it's off by a factor of 5, even if it's 150,000 new cases a day, which is a lot larger, it's still smaller than the United States, which is kind of interesting and shocking and sad. And
they have 1.5 billion people there?
I think it's been a while. It's 1.3 years, exactly, right around there, right behind China.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the point. Per capita, the incidence is just so much higher here.
Yeah.
And that's despite the higher vaccination rate and, higher infrastructure and being a quote-unquote more developed country, you know what I mean?
And by the way, the numbers sound right. I mean, the 2000, the numbers, the deaths tend to follow increases, spikes.
Yes.
It's like a 2-week difference.
Oh, yeah, totally. No, anyway.
But yeah, you're talking about India.
I'm talking about India, exactly.
Yeah.
Just because, we didn't know if we could trust them.
Yeah.
And some people were speculating that the actual deaths were as high as 10 times higher than what they were reporting.
Yeah, in India.
And they were reporting
mass graves and
stuff. They were
Yeah.
reporting some serious deaths too. They're second only to the United States, I believe, with around, or maybe third,
Brazil.
with 400,000.
Yeah.
About 400,000 deaths. But again, if it's 10 times higher, it wouldn't be 4 million deaths to be clear. It was during the peak of when it was bad, but it would be a lot more than 400,000 to be sure.
Yeah.
In national news, back here in the States, the Supreme Court has ruled to block President Biden's extension on eviction bans. The court concluded that the administration did not have the authority to extend a moratorium imposed by Congress, and if they desired, Congress must specifically authorize it. South Dakota's Attorney General, Jason Ravnsborg, was fined in a case from last year. This was from September of last year. I was living in South Dakota when this stuff was happening, so I was paying some attention to it.
Yeah, I thought about that when I was reading the story.
Yeah. And I kind of want to come back to this. So I'll just say he basically got a fine. He got effectively a slap on the wrist despite being the Attorney General and killing a dude. He killed a guy who was driving down a freeway at night, hits a dude while he's switching lanes while using his cell phone. So that's just stupid to begin with. Hits the dude, kills him, says he thinks it's a deer, doesn't know what it is. Then he drives back out in the morning, checks out the body, realizes it's a human body, and reports it. And, from his text messages and stuff, it's all consistent. But like I said, I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
In international news, yesterday 2 explosions and gunfire erupted outside of Kabul's airport. 72 Afghans and 13 U.S. servicemen lost their lives. Many more were wounded. Taliban officials initially stated that they lost 28 members, but have since retracted that statement, saying they didn't lose any. President Biden stated that the U.S. will retaliate, saying, quote, "We will not forgive, we will not forget, we will hunt you down and make you pay," end quote. I do like the cadence on those lines. I just don't like the content of the lines.
Yeah.
But those are good short sentences there. The attacks are believed to be committed by ISIS-K. On the attack, former U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6 members stated that it's time to, quote, "kill people and drop our stupid rules of engagement," end quote. Well, that's the kind of thing that I'll have a comment about. Okay. U.S. officials in Kabul have provided the Taliban a list of names of American citizens, green card holders, and Afghan allies to grant them entrance into Kabul airport. The move, which was designed to expedite the evacuations, is being slammed on both sides of the aisle as giving a militant group a quote-unquote kill list. In tech news, China is implementing new rules to tech algorithms in their country. The restrictions target recommendations to users across multiple platforms and are to forbid practices that, quote, encourage addiction or high consumption, end quote. The U.S. has attempted to implement similar rules in the past with little success, but with the power of the CCP over virtual information and the internet, we'll see if they succeed. I think Austin was saying they will likely succeed. And in the short run, I think I agree with you, but we'll see what happens in the long run. In Earth and Science news, about 14,000 firefighters are battling strong and growing blazes in California. Thursday saw the start of a new fire in the Sierra foothills. Again, big problem. With that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, a couple things to come back to here. I'll just start with Jason Ravnsburg. I don't know that I've talked about this before on the air. I did work for years with my dad, journalistically, where, I was like a late teen, early 20s, barely politically conscious, but still exploring the world and trying things out, doing different stuff. So my dad had switched from being a left-wing journalist to a right-wing journalist, and really had switched from being like a left-wing media person to like a right-wing journalist. The weird switch. And I was part of that whole thing. I remember helping him make videos for Move On when I was like 15 or 16 years old, where I would just be hanging out and he'd be like, "Come on, check it out. You can see what the production's like, get some experience." And then a couple of years later, it's like I'm hanging out with Andrew Breitbart in the Standard Hotel in Los Angeles. Andrew Breitbart, founder of Breitbart.com, Breitbart News, the whole thing, not a left-wing person. My point is there was this like really rapid shift to the other side. Anyway, later on, we went and worked in South Dakota, where there is and was some intense and ongoing political corruption. We focused on a couple of things. For one thing, the situation with the reservations is absolutely and criminally abusive.
Yeah.
I'm talking, of course, about the Native American reservations, where the poverty, you can imagine the abuse. You can imagine the abuse by federal officials and state officials. And effectively, it's a money-grabbing scheme for state officials who get extra tax benefits, get extra subsidies, are able to pocket a lot of that money and apportion it where they want to because they have reservations in the state. And this is where it gets truly like disgusting.
You mean casinos or something like that? I mean, what's the revenue base?
Well, for the res, it's often the casinos, but the state government also gets money to help the res out.
Oh, I see.
It's been a while since I've gotten into this stuff, but I remember I could get back into it and then come and explain it. What I do remember very viscerally, because it's quite visceral, is welfare situations where there's a specific case that just was buried by the local government, where basically a dude, a grown man, adopts Native American kids, molests them repeatedly, and I won't get into his disgusting, like games and abuse and just long-term stuff that he's doing with these kids. It's repeatedly reported to state officials, but they do nothing about it, repeatedly, at all. Because if they were to report it, it would look bad for them.
Right.
Because they let this guy, the problem compounds for years and years and years. And the dude's getting money for molesting kids because, he's taking in kids who aren't his own. He gets a kickback for that, basically, and he's molesting them. And then the state attorney general at the time, this guy named Marty Jackley, basically covered it up. And we were going there, we're investigating this stuff. It was pretty damn bad. At one point, I think like a retired colonel or something who we were sort of talking to, he gave us a gun for self-protection. Yeah. I don't know if it was that was necessary, but that
he thought somebody was coming and get you?
He thought the attorney general had it out for us because there were rumors that this guy that dude had been killed with a shotgun while I was out hunting, and the dude who'd been killed by a shotgun knew things about the government, and it was rumored that he had been killed by the government, and it's that kind of thing. And so I was maybe like 21 years old or something, and at a certain point, I will admit, I got cowardly like a couple of months into it, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, guys, this is too much for me. I need to bail. I need to get on with my life.
That's funny.
Yeah, well, because I didn't exactly want to be a journalist. Anyway, that's my experience with South Dakota. That was previous Attorney General Marty Jackley. I remember Kristi Noem, current governor. She was an up-and-coming politician at the time. Now she's governor. She's turned on Ravnsborg on this one. She's hitting him, basically saying he should have resigned.
Yeah. She's
doing the anti-Ravnsborg campaign here. You might expect it to be the left wing or something. These are both Republicans, of course. It's a Republican-dominated state. But it's vicious. And at the end of the day, I kind of agree with the point that she makes, which is he killed a guy.
1,000% agree.
He got a fine for it.
Slap on the wrist. And it's even worse because this is so, if this was any of us, anybody in the studio, we would be in a cage right now. I don't believe for a moment they would have did by hook or by crook to put that person in a cage. But thus, we don't have any powers to do anything. And it's like, does it have anything to do with the fact that this guy is kind of a powerful person within the context of the state or within the context of the city? And does it have anything to do with the relationships he might have had with the various people there? I mean, the judge is like, I can't do anything. It's like, whatever.
No.
You can put a ham sandwich in prison if you need to. And I just don't buy. I mean, dude hits somebody, throws the guy in a ditch. The cops said that the force that the guy hit had left his glasses in the window or something like that. That was one of the things in the document.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes home and comes back after leaving the guy dead in the ditch all night. And he's like, I thought I hit a deer. Okay, did he think he hit a deer? Or did he know enough about law to say, I thought I hit a deer?
Yeah, exactly.
It's that stuff.
And then he maintains plausible deniability by not texting anybody about it. And no, I could see that too. I don't know. But the point is, even if I take him at his word, it's definitely seems like he should get more than a freaking fine for killing somebody. As the attorney general of the state, as the moral paragon for the state.
Yeah. But for him, he's like, I don't, people die, just a mistake, And then didn't even show up to the trial.
He didn't. That's another side of this.
Didn't even show up to the trial. Couldn't be bothered.
And then the family of the victim, of course, was, as they would be, insulted by that. Like, you killed our brother, son, husband, and you don't even show your face?
Yeah, after leaving him in a ditch all night.
Yep.
What happens if he would have called the ambulance at the moment? Meaning, he might have died over the course of the night, not in the moment.
Yeah.
And it's very possible that if he would have acted like a human being and said, hey, I think I hit somebody, could you please come in, maybe they could have saved that guy's life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like all of that stuff should matter. All of that stuff should apply, especially since he was breaking the law in pursuit of killing the guy. I mean, come on. I mean, and then leave the scene of an accident. That's why I don't buy it, right? Because it's like, if he says, I knew it was a person and I left. Well, you went to jail, buddy, right? And so the only way that works is, I thought it might have been a deer.
Yep.
And then you can say, it's a person. I never knew.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's the only way you can kind of skate that line where they can give you a pass on that nonsense. No, he knows enough about the law to be able to say whatever he needs to say to give the plausible deniability, not to mention the wink and a nod from people who are probably working with him to let him walk. And $500 fine.
Attorney General, so he has the, clearly legal connections.
That's right.
Established in the system. Quick heads up for anybody talking about this story. It is pronounced Ravnsborg. I know it has like a V in the name, and so it looks like Ravensburg or something, but it's Ravnsborg.
Ravnsborg, okay.
Ravnsborg. And with that, I think I'm going to take us into our break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we're going to be in our soapbox segment, Jamarl's monologue, maybe a short back and forth. After that, getting into a conversation about artificial intelligence. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines, back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want to record.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. There was a terrorist attack in Afghanistan at the Kabul airport yesterday. 13 service members have been killed. Apparently dozens of Afghanis have been killed in the process. And for you to realize how bad this is, you only need to use a bit of your imagination and a bit of your memory. Think back to the scenes in the airport. All of the people, the throngs of people, hoping beyond hope just to get on an airplane to get out of the country. Some people had worked with the invading American force or the previous government. Some were interpreters, some all sorts of jobs, working all sorts of governments. And many of those people were concerned about their lives. And some people just didn't necessarily want to be there with the Taliban taking over. There's all sorts of reasons why the people are there. I'm trying to make the point, though, that the airport, massively crowded, massively chaotic. And within the context of all of these crowds and all of this chaos, a suicide bomber was able to get close enough within the context of that crowd to rip the bomb, killing and maiming and injuring dozens that are nearby, not to mention the people who were wounded. A second bomb went off soon after, and this one, supposedly nearby hotel, and this one, again, massive devastation, massive force, massive chaos. Now, the weird part about this is of all the things that have been taking place in regards to leaving the country and the withdrawal and everything else, this is the one thing that Biden actually predicted correctly. If you remember, he made the point that there were threats. We need to be out here by August 31st. There are security concerns. If you remember, Vladimir Putin came out and did the same thing, pulled out, I think it was like 500 people or so out of the country, meaning the other countries and the people were clearly aware that there was a terrorist threat that was imminent and that they did what they could to try to prevent it. But again, it's a chaotic situation. There's all hell breaking loose on the ground. A suicide bomber was able to get through, multiple people killed, including U.S. servicemen. So, of course, the president of the United States has to respond. He has to give a statement. And in this statement, he even answered questions after the fact. Again, on some level, you have to do that. I want to play Biden's first clip because people, especially on the right, have been attacking Biden for this. But it's like, what do you think is taking place in Kabul's airport? Do you think it's a safe harbor? Do you think that extricating a war is somehow a safe process? The fact that they were calling for terrorist threats should have made it very clear that the American soldiers that were there were in danger. But they knew they were in danger. They were in danger the entire time they were in Afghanistan. And in this particular case, trying to extricate ourselves, yes, they were in a situation of threat that they had no choice but to be in as they extricated themselves from the country. This is not something I'm going to hit Biden on because I don't necessarily think Biden could have did anything about it. But let's play Biden's clips because I think the one thing that we need to reconcile is that we've lost, 2,500, give or take, American servicemen in the country. 12 more in the process of leaving. While tragic, it's not mind-blowing, and it's certainly not something where you should stay in perpetuity in order to have some kind of revenge associated with it. It is time to bring our troops home, throw those troops a parade, do due diligence in having an autopsy with a scathing look at the presidents that were involved in the process, at the media that was involved in the process, and the lies that took place over the last 20 years, the way the money was spent, the way the corruption went on, the nation-building exercise, the fact that they didn't know what they were doing in regards to the persecution of the war. All of those things need to be looked into. But first, foremost, get our troops home, throw them a parade, call it a day. Let's go to Biden. This is Biden's first.
To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command.
Okay. He would defend his people with every measure at his command. Let's go to the next one. Biden says he bears responsibility for the recent attacks. Now, this one is interesting because this gets into this notion of, look, the last few decisions that were made, especially in this thing of pulling us out of Afghanistan, yes, the buck stops with me. So yeah, on some level, Biden is responsible for those choices. But again, what was he going to do? And would staying there beyond the 31st have been somehow better or prevented this? And the answer, of course, is indubitably no. Let's play the next clip. Biden says he bears responsibility.
Said the buck stops with you. Do you bear any responsibility for the way that things have unfolded in the last 2 weeks?
I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened of late. But here's the deal. You know, I wish you'd one day say these things. You know as well as I do that the former president made a deal with the Taliban that he would get all American forces out of Afghanistan by May 1. The reason why there were no attacks on Americans, as you said, from the date until I came into office, was because the commitment was made by President Trump, I will be out by May 1st. In the meantime, you agree not to attack any Americans. That was the deal. That's why no American was attacked. Imagine where we'd be if I had indicated on May the 1st I was not going to renegotiate an evacuation date. We were going to stay there. I'd have only one alternative: pour thousands of more troops back into Afghanistan to fight a war that we had already won relative to why the reason we went in the first place. As I've said 100 times, terrorism is metastasized around the world. We have greater threats coming out of other countries, a heck of a lot closer to the United States. We don't have military encampments there. We don't keep people there. We have over-the-horizon capability to keep them from going after us. Ladies and gentlemen, it was time to end a 20-year war. Thank you so much.
Yeah, please stop it. Yeah, it is time to end a 20-year war. And again, Biden is right. I think some of the press need to reconcile themselves with that we lost a war. We were in an occupation. We've been evicted from that occupation. And the notion that we have all of this choice and leeway and agency, it's not part of the process. That is some level of magical thinking. Biden, when the general last night in the press conference, made the point that we have been working with the Taliban on issues of security. Even Biden in the statement made the point we've been working with them going all the way back for like a year to ensure that American troops aren't hit as they pull out of the country. I think I mentioned before, I hope I said 13, but my producer mentioned, I think I said 12, but it's 13 service members just to be exact. Look, what Biden is saying here, it may be uncomfortable for some people to reconcile, but he's not wrong, especially in this very specific case. And from the standpoint of options and priorities and the things that you can do and the agency that you have and a cause effect, what's the best outcome? Staying in no way is a better outcome. Whether American troops were killed in this process or not, staying is not a better outcome. One last point. In the same way that we've been working with the Taliban, we need to have an honest reconciliation about what matters more going forward. What I mean by that is, what kind of Afghanistan do you want to have? Do you want to have one that is hit with sanctions, that is already racked with all sorts of monetary difficulties and economic difficulties, with an inability to keep the lights on, et cetera? Do you want that country to fall into disrepute? Are you going to keep the billions of dollars that you're basically stealing from that particular government? Are you going to give clandestine support in order to keep the country in this kind of basket case, perpetual wartime situation? What are you going to do going forward? My point here is that the United States and Taliban are in this weird situation where they are basically fighting the same enemy. How weird is that? But it is true. The security that is taking place is with the Taliban and the United States working in tandem. The key here is that if you want to ensure that the terrorists take it, if you want to ensure that ISIS-K or whatever these other groups get a foothold and are able to bring people into their fold and create a destabilized Afghanistan, the fastest and surest way to do it is sanctions, stealing the money, passing, getting rid of resources, etc. If you turn that country into a basket case, all sorts of monsters and creatures are going to come out of that country, and they're not going to stay isolated to Afghanistan. This is a cause and effect thing. Give the Taliban a chance. Yes, they're terrorists. Yes, they're ideological actors like nobody's business. Yes, I saw reports talking about music saying we're going to convince people, basically we're going to kill people if they don't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't work with them in a diplomatic way to ensure that the country doesn't fall into disrepute. And we've been there, again, for 20 years, spent $3 trillion to do it, hundreds of thousands of Afghan lives, including 50 to 100,000 civilians. It is time for us to go. Shane, what are your thoughts? I have nothing, no issue with Biden's speech here. At least that part of the speech. There are other parts, but that very specific part of him basically sticking to his guns, we're leaving. I have no options in regards to staying.
Yes.
It's time to go.
Yeah, ultimately, that's 100% the right message. And even if he's going to give some nods to the need for vengeance with, we will hunt them down, that kind of thing. Yeah. You need to do that kind of thing. And, we were talking yesterday. You heard my take on this. It's basically what you were saying. If we work with the Taliban, if all of a sudden ISIS or ISIL-K, if they're attacking us and they're attacking the Taliban, and we're mutual victims, and suddenly we share an enemy, and you know what that tends to do to people. It tends to make them friends.
Yeah.
At least in the classic formulation.
I mean, think of Uncle Joe.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
But we'll see what actually happens. You have a third clip though, right?
There's a Peter Ducey clip.
If we have time for it, I'd like to hear it.
Okay, let's go ahead. Let's do it. Peter Ducey versus Joe Biden. Peter Ducey, look. Peter Ducey at times have asked really good questions to Jen Psaki. In this, he is trying to, from my take, basically get some level of partisan hits off of the dead bodies of our soldiers, purely for partisan gain. Let's hear his fake outrage. Let's play the clip.
You know as well as I do that the former president made a deal with the Taliban that he would get all American forces out of Afghanistan by May 1. In return, the commitment was made, and that was a year before. In return, he was given a commitment that the Taliban would continue to attack others, but would not attack any American forces. Remember that? I'm being serious. No, I'm asking you a question. Because before... No, wait a minute. I'm asking you a question. Is that accurate, the best of your knowledge? What?
I don't think it's the issue that... do you think that people have an issue with pulling out of Afghanistan or just the way that things...
Well, let's do this. Let's cut this and come back to it because we have a hard stop.
And that was the end of it anyway.
Yeah. But you heard the back and forth, them two, and yeah, we can come back to it. We can talk about it.
People try to get us to stay there effectively, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's the messaging.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, man. Why? Think about that for a second. Okay, so people got killed there.
Soldiers.
You're balancing the desire for vengeance with the reality that people got killed there because they're there,
right? Not
back at home,
right?
And do we want to send people overseas so we can bring them back in caskets? Is that the mission? Is that the price we're going to pay for our bloodlust? That's the point. We got to go into our break. I get it. And we'll be coming back talking about AI. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're joined by Professor Roman Yampolsky. He's a computer scientist, AI safety and security researcher, and the director of the cybersecurity laboratory at the Speed School of Engineering. Find him on Twitter at Roman Yam, and that is Yam like the tuber, although, of course, that's not his full last name. Professor Yampolsky, thank you again for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Good to hear. Here's what I wanted to talk with you about. OpenAI has this new program, really a package, I'll leave it to you to define exactly, called OpenAI Codex, which is effectively, as far as I can tell, the first fairly successful instance of a computer programming in response to robust text commands. Now, that's a little bit dense. I kind of want to unpack that slightly, but basically, an AI is programming with a human and sort of taking a lot of the work that a human would be doing off of their back. This opens up all sorts of interesting problems, all sorts of interesting things, but I want to hand it off to you. Did I get that roughly right? What would you correct about that? And how significant is this really, do you think, Professor Yampolsky?
No, you got it right. You can say it's translating from human programming languages such as English to machine programming languages. It's pretty good at what it does for, being recently developed. I'm sure it's going to get much better soon. And right now, it's still not exceeding what a human programmer can do. It still can only program things it previously seen or combining something it saw before. It's not very good at coming up with new algorithms or even debugging itself. But as I said, I think it's going to improve quickly.
It'll improve quickly. And it's the fact that it has gotten, maybe it hasn't passed the human level, but because it can do it so quickly, and effectively a novice programmer, if they have at least a moderate understanding of what kinds of methods and functions they want to use, a novice programmer could use this thing theoretically to program entire apps. Or do you disagree with that?
Yeah, apps for sure. Yeah.
And so what does that lead to? I mean, maybe I want to come to the AI safety angle, and I want to get into exactly what that means. But thinking about this just from a sort of layperson standpoint or from a programmer's perspective, is this going to revolutionize the programming industry?
It will, especially, as you said, for beginners. It will automate a lot of what we currently use, students and co-ops for basic level programming. Again, this technology progresses very quickly. Similar language models for just writing English text went from really terrible to you cannot tell if it's a human or machine writing within a few years, and we expect that progress to continue here.
And maybe let's step back for a second, because I want to talk about GPT, specifically GPT-3, which I believe this is a descendant of. That's sort of what you're talking about. GPT-2, I remember checking that out a little bit back in the day. It was quite impressive. GPT-3 is incredibly impressive. Basically, can you explain for us what these are? These are major advances as far as I can tell. Can you explain what they are?
Right. Those are very, very large models, neural networks trained on a lot of text. Like if you download all of internet, that much text. And surprisingly, they are able to generalize beyond just text completion. They can do some basic math. They can play chess. We're starting to see they are able to translate between different domains of knowledge, skills they already have. So they are pre-trained. And if you give them a little help, they become very capable in specialized domains, such as programming.
So you can give them, again, you give them prompts. That's basically how it works. There's a sort of a corpus or a body of the actual machine learning code on the back end that you effectively never interface with. It's basically like a chat box, right? You say things in response to it. You sort of set it up in a certain way. You could write, I'm talking to a chat bot who's very friendly but a little bit rude. And then you start typing out your sort of question or statement to it, and it will start to fill that in. You can basically get these long conversation trees. Is that sort of explaining that right?
Yeah, that's about right. And it can produce text. It can finish stories. If you give it some examples, it can write advertisements for you, things of that nature.
So here's the thing. I've seen this, and I hear myself talking about it, and when I saw it, I was blown away, partly because I'd seen, growing up, what simple chatbots could do back in the day, which is trivial and remedial compared to what this system can do. Is there a fundamental difference? And, if you share the sort of sentiment that I do, that this is quite extreme compared to what we're used to. Is there any way that you could try to get that across? I'm struggling to figure out how exactly.
Well, I think the most interesting part is that it surprises us in terms of what it can do, and it keeps improving. So a lot of times in AI, you have a breakthrough, and this is it. Now you need to wait for the next breakthrough. Whereas with the recent language models, it's all about compute. If you keep adding more compute, giving it more training data, it keeps scaling up. It keeps improving, and we don't see any obvious limits within near future. So there is a good chance it might keep scaling to human level performance or even beyond.
Or even beyond if you keep throwing compute at it. Can you explain what compute is?
Just computers, like a lot of computational resources, supercomputers.
So basically processing power. I mean, and this would be using GPUs, or usually specially designed graphics processing units, but basically it's just throwing more processing power at it, right?
Yes, that's right. And there are specialized chips designed for training neural networks, which will exceed the current level of performance for just graphics cards.
That makes sense. And I know that Google's been developing those. So a couple of different ways we could go here. One might be to revisit the idea of the Turing test, which is, kind of embedded in cultural consciousness at this point, but also this sort of recursively self-improving AI that the programming, the OpenAI codex that we were talking about a minute ago, that'll come back up. Let's start with the Turing test, though. You were talking about AIs approaching human-level capabilities, specifically with the GPT-3 model and with the OpenAI Codex one, sometime in the future possibly as well, too, likely. The Turing test, Alan Turing, mathematician during World War II, famous figure. Can you explain what is the Turing test, Professor Yampolsky?
Right, so it's very hard to define what intelligence is, very hard to define what is artificial intelligence or to test it. So Turing had this brilliant idea. I'm not going to define it. I'm just going to say if you can't tell whatever something is done by a human or machine, you have to assume the machine is just as capable. So his test was all around the idea of text, just producing answers, questions to answers. And if you can tell whatever you're chatting to a machine or a human, then you have to accept that that machine is pretty damn smart. Same can be done in other domains. So if I look at a program and I can tell whatever it's written by a human or machine, I have to agree that that machine is a pretty good programmer.
And it has to do with sort of this definition of consciousness, which is inherently murky, but something that we're looking for, at least human level intelligence, which adds this ethical dimension to it. Have computers passed the Turing test so far on a large scale?
So it depends on how you look at it. If you have not the smartest referees, judges for that, and very limited time, let's say at most 5 minutes, then yes, there are cases where it was passed. But unlimited, unrestricted test with judges who know what to ask, not yet.
Not yet. And we were talking about the scalability. Like you were saying, these are models that if you throw more compute at them, if you throw more processing power, they will basically, apparently, continue to scale. Their abilities will continue to scale. They'll get faster. The interlacing of the connections they're drawing on, that kind of thing it'll get more complex. They'll recognize more dimensions. I'm talking as if I know what I'm talking about here, but basically, theoretically, you can just continue to grow these things, and almost invariably, it seems, they will pass that test sometime not too far in the future, right?
Right, and the system itself is becoming more and more useful, so it starts helping you develop the next generation of the system, and that creates this feedback, positive cycle of faster improvement.
And that's the recursive self-improvement thing that we were talking about. You brought us right there. Can you just get a little bit more into that? I'll put it like this. My co-host and I, Jamarl, were having a conversation the other day, and I was talking about my main concern with this thing, or my main hedge, is our brains, to us, are really quite complicated. Even still, modern neuroscience, we're still trying to figure things out. We're making advances, but there seems like there's this inherent complexity there. I'm going to bring in from another completely other angle, Kurt Gödel, the second incompleteness theorem, this fundamental revolutionary advance in early 20th century mathematics, basically saying you can't have a mathematical system, you can't have a way of understanding things that is both internally consistent, completely internally consistent, and comprehensive, that covers all of the ground. And I'm going to apply that for a minute to our own intelligence and to AIs as well. Do you think that there's a limit there, or is this, is there a limit for computers? Is there a limit on a computer's ability, or a neural network's ability to understand itself? Because as it bootstraps itself, it embeds like more complexity on the lower levels. I hope this is making sense. But what's your take on that, Professor Yampolsky?
It doesn't. There are well-recognized limits in terms of what we can explain and what we can comprehend. And I have a few papers showing that, we cannot explain how a more intelligent agent makes decisions. And if they provide such an explanation, we would not comprehend it. It also applies to AI itself. So it wouldn't be able to do such level of self-analysis. But as we said, scaling hypothesis gives us this way to build more powerful agent without necessarily fully understanding it. You just add more components, you create a bigger model.
Well, but even if we don't assume intelligence, that could theoretically get quite dangerous, right? If you have a limited system that is, again, it's not dealing with all of the data, it doesn't have the wisdom that you might expect of a person, for instance, and you have it run very, very quickly, solving problems, it might not actually solve the problems. It might exacerbate them, except very quickly. And this is a sort of, isn't this a foundation of one of the AI safety problems, that the limited purview that we have over AI behavior at the beginning, if you scale it up, theoretically it starts to run away and act very chaotically in ways you can't predict, and it might be very dangerous.
Right. You can't really monitor it live, and it will surprise you with decisions it makes, with solutions it finds. So that's exactly a problem a lot of us are concerned with. Depending on what access the system has, what it controls, it could make really bad decisions which influence a lot of people.
I don't mean to be either hyperbolic and fear-mongery or naive. Between those two extremes, how dangerous of a threat compared to many others that we're familiar with, biopandemics, a pandemic simply, asteroids hitting the Earth, other existential risks, how dangerous do you see AI being potentially?
Well, it's interestingly a meta problem, right? AI or superintelligence can create or solve all these other existential threats. So an AI can design synthetic biology. It can create new viruses. Likewise, it can be used to prevent problems. It can solve climate change, for example. So it's both a tool we need to survive long-term and potentially as dangerous as all these other existential threats combined.
And so I want to take us into a break in a minute here, but one last question, then I want to come back and carry this on. I'll start with OpenAI, which we've been talking about. That's effectively, it's not open source isn't the right word, but they're basically an open, nonprofit, public AI research organization. Is that right, Professor?
They have been evolving a lot. I think they evolved from open source nonprofit to maybe more closed source, working with Microsoft, investing billions into them. So it's a very fuzzy structure.
That makes sense. And then I'm setting that up. We also have, and we haven't mentioned this yet, but also responsible for huge advances in machine learning. You also have DeepMind with Google. And here's what I want to get to when we come back from our break. Both OpenAI and DeepMind have been doing foundational, revolutionary, incremental, but incredible research on machine learning. And yet they both are quite concerned from what I can tell about AI safety. And there's a contradiction here. On the one hand, it would be like if J. Robert Oppenheimer, when he was developing the nuclear bomb, realized in advance the threat and decided to go through with it anyway, as a way to stop a nuclear bomb from being developed. I know that starts to fall apart and it doesn't make sense, but that's kind of what I see here. I want to come back. I want to hear your take on that in just a minute. We're joined by Professor Roman Yampolsky. For those listening, he's a computer scientist, AI safety and security researcher, and the director of the cybersecurity laboratory at the Speed School of Engineering. Follow him on Twitter at Roman Yam. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
In traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Professor Roman Yampolsky, computer scientist, AI safety and security researcher, and the director of a cybersecurity laboratory at the Speed School of Engineering. Follow him on Twitter, by the way, at Roman Yam. Professor Yampolsky, when we went into our break, I brought up OpenAI and DeepMind, these two fundamental AI research organizations doing research into machine learning. They're also staffed by people, I hear, who are quite worried about AI safety, the threat of AI getting out of control, potentially being used in malicious ways, which we haven't even talked about yet. And I brought up, the apparent contradiction to me. On the one hand, they're pursuing this research with some passion and dedication and quite quickly. On the other hand, they're quite worried about this, and it seems like they're breeding the monsters that they're concerned about. What's your take on that, Professor Yampolsky?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and we can go beyond those two companies. I think Tesla just had their AI day, and Elon Musk is, of course, well known for his concerns about superintelligence, but they disclosed some really good progress in building both hardware for AI and AI software. So it seems to be, yes, we have people who are first saying that superintelligence will be extremely dangerous and then trying to build it as fast as possible. So it is very interesting to psychoanalyze this, and you can talk about conflicts of interest and profit motive. You can look at it as a need to have those agents, to study them, to get to safety. If we don't have actual systems, how can we run experiments on them? So that's important. There is also a competition angle, the arms race. If we don't do it, then, Chinese get there first, and then we'll have to deal with evil AI from someone else. So there is a number of different reasons, but it's not obvious that it's completely rational. And speeding up progress so much is beneficial for humanity in the absence of safety mechanisms.
It's not obvious that that's the case. Yeah, well, you brought up a couple of interesting points there. I want to get a little bit more into this, and I want to be clear. I don't want to be too critical of these organizations. I respect the work that they've been doing very much, but I'm as perplexed as you are watching this. It's like I said, it seems like, they're very concerned about it, but they're doing it nonetheless and doing it faster than anybody else. I want to get more into the last one that you brought up, competition. Who do you see OpenAI and DeepMind specifically competing with? Who are the other big contenders in this space?
So they obviously compete with each other. I think now Tesla and Apple are starting to get into that game, maybe even Facebook, and of course foreign actors. You have governments, you have countries like China, like Russia, all trying to dominate this space. So there is plenty of competition. Also, it's such a quickly changing domain. Any startup we don't know about today can quickly get to speed if they are successful in coming up with a new algorithm.
I want to come back to that actually, because there's a part of that that I don't know if I quite agree, but obviously I want to check with you first. But I want to continue going through this. You also brought up conflicts of interest. So the profit motive. Clearly, Google, I'll start with them. If they can come up with better AI that can help them to advertise more directly, more profitably, that's in their best interest, certainly. That's the kind of thing that comes to my mind. What else do you see?
Right. So if you can get general AI, it's access to free labor, both physical and cognitive. It's easily trillions of dollars worth of wealth. It completely redefines how you make money, redefines the economy. So the payoff is huge. Sadly, the downside could also be quite large.
It sounds like it. And then I want to get to one last thing. Talking about experimentation, you also brought up general AI. I want to come back to that too, because that's a key concept. But experimentation, like you said, if they can create these systems in a sort of closed environment, they can theoretically understand them. And, again, with controls, they can run experiments. They can do that in a sort of broader sense. But is that actually safe? I've read about how, a sufficiently intelligent artificial intelligence could convince the people who've kept it captive, so to speak, to let it out. It could start to lie to them, and that might sound paranoid, but once you start dealing with certain levels of intelligence, that's justified, right? What do you think about that, Professor Yampolsky?
But there is also more obvious ways to get the software out. Insider threat, somebody on the inside could just release it for whatever personal reasons, mental illness, blackmail. There is so many possible reasons why we have leaks of information, why we have cyber attacks succeed in social engineering. So it's very difficult to build a very safe, secure environment when so many people are involved and there is so much interest in getting access.
Yeah, and that's another incentive, like we were sort of talking about in another way earlier. You brought up AGI, or I think you said actually general artificial intelligence, but artificial general intelligence is a term that goes around. Also strong AI, that kind of thing. Can you just explain that? That's like the dream for a lot of people in this research, right? What is that?
So systems we have today are mostly very narrow. They know how to play chess. They know how to drive a car, but that's it, one thing. We're trying to build systems which can learn new skills and do many things simultaneously. So once you create the system, it can drive a car, it can play chess, it can invest successfully in a stock market. It's generalizing across multiple domains, kind of like humans do, but way better, way faster, with more domains.
And right now, just briefly, how close do you think we are to that? What kind of metrics would you use to determine how close we are to that? And who are the best contenders, DeepMind, OpenAI, other parties we haven't mentioned, who are the best contenders for developing something like that in your eyes?
It is very hard to predict exactly how close we are. We see some really good progress. Many human-dominated domains have fallen. Now machines are superior to us, whatever it's playing games. So even we're starting to see them dominate driving in terms of safety. So I'm not going to give you a specific number. I would be surprised in 20 years if we don't see something like that. But I don't know exact date for predicting when it might happen.
But so you're saying you're moderately confident that within 20 years we'll see something like that, right?
I mean, I would give about maybe 10% probability to the next 5 years and everything else after that.
I see. So it is truly undetermined. All right. I want to come back to something else you were saying earlier. You said basically newbies, new contenders could theoretically rise up, quickly dominate. And so the existing firms have this incentive to sort of expand their share of the marketplace, to try to figure out as much new stuff as possible, potentially to co-opt new startups, that kind of thing. That was at least how I interpreted what you said. Please correct me if that's the wrong interpretation. But here's my question. Isn't it the case that the parties, OpenAI and DeepMind, if we just focus on them, they've done so much research. Wouldn't the gap between a new contender in the field and the existing institutions be so large that it would be practically impossible to cross? Professor?
Right, and also they have tremendous resources, and as we said, you need resources to get the compute, which seems to be the driving force behind it. So they definitely have a huge advantage, but what happens sometimes, people working at those companies, they leave, they take the knowledge with them, and because they are considered such experts, they quickly raise funding to start a new company, and we've seen it happen before where a competition is created by a kind of split research group from a larger corporation. So it might happen, but I would definitely think either OpenAI or Google DeepMind would be the ones most likely to succeed first.
They really are the leaders in the field. That's why I sort of led with them. I want to get into a general conversation in the couple of minutes that we have left. We've been talking about AI safety, broadly speaking, the threats from AI, and I'm very curious. I want to get into the work that you do and that's involved in AI safety research. Quick heads up, I was actually involved in the rationalist community briefly out in the Bay Area. I was friends with some folks who worked at MIRI, the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, and we would get into conversations. And so I know a little bit of it, but I never worked with them. I've never done work on this. And it's always been personally interesting to me. I know that they're looking into sort of mathematical formalisms. That's what MIRI does. They're looking into sort of axiomatically, how can you build up a provably safe AI? That's one branch of research. I know there are others. How are different people focusing on keeping artificial intelligence safe and ethical in the long run? And what do you personally do, Professor?
So my research in the last couple years has been all about establishing kind of limits to what is possible in terms of control, things like predictability of what the systems might do in terms of decision making, explainability, comprehensibility of that decision, and control in general. Can lower level intelligence control a more intelligent agent? And I'm not seeing a lot of opportunities in all these domains. There are very strict limits to what can be done, and we are hitting those limits. We are no longer able to fully comprehend those systems. They're just too complex. Obviously, lower level intelligence cannot predict decisions of higher level intelligence, otherwise it would be that intelligent itself. And there are, again, very strict limits in terms of control. Depending on how you define control, whether it's direct control, following orders, or ideal advisor, where the system makes the decisions for you, there are some serious side effects in all these cases.
Can you get into that? I mean, you're bringing up limits. You're speaking about it generally, and I understand what you mean generally. But can you give us some specific examples, either of how the artificial intelligence could go wrong, so to speak, or simple ignorance? And I don't know how you would disambiguate the two, but what limits are you talking about, Professor?
So I'm talking about limits in terms of what we humans can comprehend about those systems and predict their behavior in order to fully test them and verify their behaviors. How they can fail and how they can be dangerous depends on what access they have. So more and more we give control and decision-making power to those systems, and we can no longer take over. So we have systems in charge of stock market. We have systems in charge of nuclear response. If those systems make bad decisions, we're talking about wiping trillions of dollars of wealth, or military response, which is not necessary.
That brings up an interesting side of this, which is AI safety. We've been speaking about, or I've been speaking about, as if it's a sort of general threat, an inherent risk to humanity. But there is also, of course, a lot on the line financially. And that would seem to be a strong incentive. How much do you see companies doing research on this, doing AI safety research specifically, versus doing general machine learning research? In other words, do the for-profit entities seem to see that they have some skin in the game in the long run, or is it left to less for-profit entities like OpenAI, for instance, to do most of this research?
Proportionately, very little is done for safety, both in terms of human resources and financial support. It's obviously more than it's been even 3 years ago, but still, if you think there is, let's say, 1 million people working on developing more capable AI, just doing AI research, there is probably less than 1,000 people who work full-time on making systems safe, especially when it comes to human level or beyond.
1 in 1,000, just a sort of back-of-the-napkin kind of estimate, is a pretty small ratio considering the magnitude of the threat. Part of, I'll use the word opacity, part of the opacity of these systems that we were talking about is due to the fact that they're neural networks, right? You were talking about we simply can't understand what an AI is going to do when it is overly complex. And, another way of looking at this is when it's smarter than us, we can't predict it. But part of this is neural nets can get very, very messy, right? The machine learning systems that we're using these days, these sort of very complicated mathematical objects, often we don't fully understand them. Or am I wrong about that?
No, you are absolutely correct. And they get so big, even if we are able to understand a few neurons and how they interact, we simply can't scale our understanding to such large models.
That makes sense. Just briefly, how pessimistic or optimistic are you about all of this stuff in general?
Well, I'm realistic. We need to invest resources. We need to invest time in doing it right. If we just try to be first to the market, we'll definitely regret it. It's very important to get it right the first time. You may not get a second chance.
That makes sense. It's disheartening to hear, but hey, realism is what I would hope to hear from you. Professor Roman Yampolsky, thank you for joining me this morning.
My pleasure.
Great talking. And for those listening, Professor Roman Yampolsky is a computer scientist, AI safety and security researcher, and the director of the Cybersecurity Laboratory at the Speed School of Engineering. Follow him on Twitter at Roman Yam. Roman Yam. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. Be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to some headlines. Good interview. I enjoyed it. I was listening, you were like, there was a part of it where we were like, I don't think I'm being too hyperbolic, but I mean, should we be concerned about this? These guys are like running headlong into this. I think the thing is, though, it's like, you know, the moment that you start something, it's hard to pull yourself back from it when you're like, when it's your topic or when it's your subject. It's almost like the very act of doing it in and of itself kind of motivates itself.
Yeah.
Just to see if you can. Not to mention the ability to bring something like that into existence. It's like, how do you pull yourself from the brink of that? I don't know how you do that.
A lot of people doing this work have stared at the void, and they've found out that the void, after a certain point, does indeed stare back.
Yeah.
That this is a really, that they're like monsters waiting in the dark. And it's not Skynet. We didn't even make the Terminator jokes, which is where a lot of people's mind goes, of course, and we talked about that before. It's not like it comes out gun blazing. It's subterfuge. In the long run, it's like this insinuous threat that at a certain point, it just overtakes our capabilities, and it sort of does what it wants to. And the fact, he said, of course, it's just an estimate on his part. 1 in every 1,000 people working on this is concerned about safety.
Yeah.
This is potentially both the most massive economic opportunity that we've ever seen, the most challenging philosophical threat that we've ever seen, just to our humanity and identity and worth as human beings, but also the most dangerous potential thing. You know, if you imagine, let's create an incredibly, incredibly intelligent race or species of amoral creatures that have absolute dominion over us, and that'll be fine. We have no idea what they're going to do, but that'll be okay, right? It seems like that's what we're heading towards, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, so there are two drives in this, right? I mean, one is financial, the other one is just doing it. And you know, even if the financial drive wasn't there, there would still be people working on it just to do it and say they could do it.
Yeah.
But from the standpoint of companies, the financial drive is the predominant thing. Meaning, if I can build this system, I can sell this system, and that system can do this, and this, we're going to make buku bucks. The Norwegian craft that is going across back and forth the water by itself now, without anybody, I think it's like a trolley of cars and everything else, by itself. You know, it's rudimentary AI, but think about as it gets more complicated.
Yeah.
I think my concern is kind of this recursive algorithm that keeps doing something that we're not entirely aware, and we find out about it too late when something has gone monstrously wrong or some weird stuff. But I don't know. You're right. It's kind of hard to predict.
It is. And you know what? People are in general concerned about stuff like AI, and I know we have headlines. But here's an actual AI safety researcher, like a class of people doing, in my opinion, very important work in terms of how it's going to affect our future. We don't really understand it. You know, most people aren't even aware that these people exist. You know what I mean? And so there's this weird little slice of like, okay, these people are creating the future in some sense, in a very real way. They're going to affect, assuming that we can develop a general artificial intelligence, they're going to affect everything about how that thing behaves, what it can do. Shouldn't we have some understanding of this process, you know?
Yeah. I mean, even the Turing test thing is always interesting to me. The ghost in the machine. Like, what's there? Is there? And it's like, you know, I assume that somebody else thinks just because I think, and I'm assuming that person is a person, is that type of thing.
Yeah.
But it is an assumption. And, you know, from the standpoint of the robot, it feels very weird to me when you have like a drone that kills somebody. And then it's like, oh yeah, the person never fired the bullet or anything else. The drone made the choice to kill the person. And it's like, oh, that feels really creepy to me. It feels like something that was not there has just killed somebody that was.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, the Terminator Wars and everything else. It just feels so weird. All right, but let's go into the headlines. Oh, first, we're off next week. So if you don't see us, we weren't ripped off the air and anything like that. I'm going on vacation. Shane's going on vacation. I'm going to be gone for about a week and a half. He's going to be gone for about 2 weeks. But I will see you back maybe a day or so after Labor Day of next week. But now that is done, let's get to the headlines. About 187,439 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were 2,212 deaths reported. Over the past week, there's been an average of 156,296 cases per day, an increase of 24% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 52% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 61% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 38,552,183 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 634,734 men, women, and children. India has been given at least one COVID-19 vaccine shot to more than half of the eligible population. The country's health ministry said it's ramping up the COVID vaccination drive. India currently has around 30,000 new cases a day. To the extent the number can be trusted, because many speculated that the actual death count was far, far higher than what has been officially released. We were talking about this earlier. They were talking about not death camps, mass graves, etc. And they were saying that the number was like 4, 5, 10 times higher than what it was. It's unclear, right? But either way, the numbers are high. But I do think it is interesting that they were able to get half their population, considering they have like 1.3 billion people.
With at least one dose. And it's half of the eligible population. And so, it's not even 50%.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's a good thing.
The Supreme Court has ruled to block President Biden's extension on eviction bans. The court concluded that the administration did not have the authority to extend a moratorium imposed by Congress, and if they desire, Congress must specifically authorize it. Jason Ravenberg, and I'm pronouncing it wrong. Ravensburg, thank you. That's what I was looking at. I was like, I'm saying this wrong.
It's like rounds without the D.
Ravensburg. Okay, this was the killing case. This was basically an attorney general of South Dakota. He hits a guy, says he believed or thought it was a deer. It wasn't a deer. It was a human being. He left the human being laying in a ditch overnight, while later on he goes back the next day, finds out that it was indeed a person, and then calls the cops. He gets a slap on the wrist. Doesn't show up to court because his lawyer is handling it. And he basically is going to have to pay a $500 fine for each count. 3 misdemeanors. Slap on the wrist. Allison Taylor of Michigan sued the city of Saginaw over the 14 parking tickets she received. She argued that the chalk parking enforcement used to mark tires violates the Fourth Amendment. To her, the mark constitutes an unreasonable search without a warrant. A 3-panel judge ruled unanimously that Taylor was right and that the practice was unconstitutional. Interesting. I like that. The Great Resignation continues in America as the pandemic rages on. About 55% of Americans in the workforce say they expect to be looking for a new job within 12 months. This occurs as the United States reached an all-time high in job openings at the end of June, with about 10.1 million positions. 56% said flexibility was the most important reason why they were looking for a new job. Next was better pay and job security. COVID. That's what that is. People got a taste of working from home and preferred working from home. They preferred to be able to incorporate their lives and stuff like that. That's what it sounds like, flexibility. Oh, that's what I take it to mean. Yesterday, 2 explosions and gunfire erupted outside of Kabul's airport. 95 Afghans and 13 U.S. service members lost their lives. Many more were wounded. Taliban officials initially stated that they lost 28 members, but have since retracted that statement, saying they didn't lose anybody. President Biden stated that the United States will retaliate, saying, "We will not forgive, we will not forget, we will hunt you down and make you pay." The attacks are believed to be committed by ISIL-K, or ISIS-K. At the very least, that's the group that basically said they did it. On the attack, a former U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6 member stated that it's time to, quote, "kill people and drop our stupid rules of engagement," unquote. We've killed 50,000 civilians to 100,000 civilians. Yeah. Calm down, cowboy. U.S. officials in Kabul have provided the Taliban a list of names of American citizens, green card holders, and Afghan allies to grant them an entrance into Kabul airport. The move, which was designed to expedite the evacuations, is being slammed on both sides of the aisle as giving militant group a kill list. China is implementing new rules to tech algorithms in their country. The restrictions target recommendations to users across multiple platforms in order to forbid practices that, quote, encourage addiction or high consumption, unquote. The United States attempted to implement similar rules in the past with little success, but with the power of the CCP over the virtual information and the internet, they will likely succeed. Also, culture. The culture is different. The United States, you're trying to tell me what to do, man. Even if I'm going to drink this 84-ounce Coke while I'm sitting here, you can't tell me what to do. It's a different culture. Country's different. A 12-year-old coder is set to make more than $400,000 by trading non-fungible tokens for 2 months. Binyamin Ahmed began coding when he was 5 years old by watching his father and turned it into a passion and a lucrative income source. And last, in Earth and Science, about 14,000 firefighters are battling strong and growing blazes in California. Thursday saw the start of a new fire in the Sierra foothills. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So I'm going to go to this one. I saw this story yesterday, and let's talk about it. U.S. officials in Kabul have provided the Taliban a set list of names of American citizens, green card holders, and Afghan allies to grant them entrance into Kabul airport. The move, which was designed to expedite the evacuations, is being slammed on both sides of the aisle for giving the militants a kill list. Now, I made this point before. We are, and I think whether it's Congress members, whether it's the media, they've done a monstrous disservice to the American public. For the last 20 years, the media has basically lied about what was going on in Afghanistan and how it was going. The politicians have basically lied. Every president has basically lied. And you have this situation where the American public has basically been given misinformation or just not talked about Afghanistan with this idea that we're getting better, we're improving. And then all of a sudden you see all of this stuff flashing on the screen. You're like, what? I thought this was going on some level better. And so you have all of these people, these hawks, these war hawks, who are now angry that Joe Biden has decided to pull us out, or let's say carry through what Donald Trump was saying to pull us out. They must reconcile themselves with the fact that Joe Biden, or whoever the president is, does not have agency and radical leeway to do whatever they want in the country. And the fact of the matter is, if you're going to get your forces out, you will need the help of the power on the ground, which is the Taliban. You may not like them. You could call them terrorists. You can say bad things about them. You can, attack them in all sorts of ways. Whatever you want to say, you still can't put your head in the ground. You have to recognize that part of the security of the airport was being taken care of by the Taliban. We have been working with them in this process. And yes, I understand that there's a threat to the Afghan allies who are left behind, but there's also a threat to the Afghan allies and the biometric data that we left behind. Both of those things are somewhat problematic. I guess my point is, I don't know the other option outside of working with the Taliban to secure the airport. And it seems that the people who are basically saying you shouldn't do this don't want us to be there or don't want us to stay there anyway. I just think they're out of touch with reality. I don't think Biden has that level of agency to make that choice as if he's unilaterally making the choice by himself. You need the assistance of the Taliban on the ground. They haven't been killing Americans. And, so, but what are your thoughts? I mean, you think I am too strong on that one, or
No, of course we know, and we've been working with them for a long time, fighting specifically the group that has taken responsibility for this bombing. Like we were talking about yesterday with Mark and with Scott, who brought up, I think for the first time we were talking about on this show, we've been working with the Taliban for half a decade, more than half a decade at this point. Again, I'm repeating myself, fighting this group. Mm-hmm. Now, I heard your monologue earlier, and the conversation we had yesterday, I was making a lot of these points too. It's basically, we're seen fighting alongside the Taliban. Is that going to cause a massive shift in the American public's perceptions of the Taliban? Because like we were saying earlier, suddenly we share an enemy. We both suffered casualties at the hands of the same perpetrator. Yeah. You know what I mean? They technically suffered more, quite a few more, and therefore there's a sense in which, I don't know, we're in this together. Yeah. But I said that, and that might be a little bit too optimistic. Are we going to is the American public going to hear or notice or think about that in the long run? Is the media going to choose to prioritize that? Or is it just going to be Americans got killed in Afghanistan? The latter. And there's going to be this sense, oh, it's all their fault. It's all those brown people's fault. You know what I mean? It's the resurrection of these attitudes that we had back in the early noughts following September 11th. I don't even know. My point is, I'm not sure that we're actually going to correctly attribute this to the party that is truly responsible, ISIS-K. Do we want to work alongside the Taliban? Is that a bridge too far for the American military establishment? Clearly not, because they've done it. But are they going to fess up to it? Is that going to be something they're willing to admit to and continue to do in a prominent public way? Probably not.
So I would say, just looking at the New York Times, they're not telling the number of people who died from that were non-service members. Meaning, they are talking about the U.S. service members, 13 service members killed. But you pretty much have to, like, scour the web to get the numbers of the people who were killed that were Afghanis. And I went through a few of these articles, and they weren't shown. Austin, our producer, was able to find the number, 95 Afghanis at this point. Look, just so we're clear, the Taliban may be a terrorist group, or at the very least considered a terrorist group, but they don't necessarily like terrorists in the country. And this level of destabilization and everything else, you would think that the enemy of my enemy is somebody that you work with, especially in the context of, leaving the country and everything else. But I don't know if it just doesn't seem like these guys are in the headspace to acknowledge reality like that. Like, their ideology in this stuff is so ingrained that reality doesn't seem to all that much matter. Because, like Biden in his speech, they were basically having to go at him as if it was his fault that this happened. It's like, what do you expect? I think you said that. It's like, what do you expect is going to happen if we stay? And do you believe it's safer, or that these service members won't be more at risk if we stay in perpetuity?
Yeah, the more the more Biden continues to be like, we should pull out, despite of every attempt to get him back in, the more I feel like I don't want to criticize this guy.
Yeah.
Even though technically he's the commander in chief, and but you get exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We would lose far more lives and we would kill far more people and arguably cause a lot more collateral damage in terms of terror.
Yeah.
Forget everything else. Terror hitting us if we stay.
Not to mention it gets unpredictable regarding the Taliban.
Yeah, the objectively right move, if you're not on the board of directors of Raytheon or something like that, is to withdraw. You know what I mean? And so he's going with that despite massive amounts of pushback from people all around him, as far as I can tell, and the media in general, left and right. Although increasingly right as time has gone on.
Yep.
But whatever. He's managed to not do that. And so good for him, seriously, for the first time. Joe Biden, I'm supportive of this specific thing that you're doing. You're doing a good job here. Keep it up. Keep it up. Let's not go back.
Yeah. When I watched this video yesterday, I was sitting there like, yeah, that's reality. I mean, like, it's like, because I felt like that speech yesterday that he gave, it felt like he was, with the exception of, we'll never forget that part. I felt like the speech was an acknowledgement of reality in a way that was just, I don't know, like trying to reconcile or trying to actually talk to the American public of like, look, this is the reality on the ground. This is what I'm confronted with. What else do you guys, this is the way forward in this particular process. And all of these guys are pressing on him. Everybody in the media, everybody is hitting him for it. And he's like, and to his credit, nobody has given him an alternative that made any sense short of any kind of reality. Just pure posturing and ideology and hurt feelings and embarrassment for for leaving. No, I agree with you. I looked at this. I approved. He stayed the course.
Yes. Now that I've said that, he still arguably should have had a much more involvement in the conversations around withdrawing.
Yeah.
Because, we were having this conversation behind the scenes the other day, basically. It seems like he's doing what Trump did, and it makes perfect sense. Trump pulled back and was barely having high-level conversations even about some of the stuff that was going on. And granted, he couldn't trust his staff, but he kind of did that to himself. The point remains, he wasn't really deeply involved.
Yeah.
That's an understatement. He wasn't really involved that much at all.
Yeah.
And a lot of the conversations about anything, I mean, military policy, economic policy, these things, we've talked about that, of course. Biden seems to be the same way, and of course, that makes sense. He was hiding for most of the last couple of years.
Yeah.
He's an old dude, but he should have been.
Yeah.
Because if he had been, if he's the one pushing for this, he needs to make sure that it goes well.
Yeah, the buck stops with you.
Buck does stop with him.
At the end of the day, anything that happens is going to be at your door. And so, yeah, I agree. I mean, we agree on that point.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, keeping the conversation going and taking your calls for about 10 minutes here. We're going to be joined by Garland Nixon in a few, talking about Afghanistan and more. But if you want to join us, this and 9:45 are your last best chances, not just this week, but like next one. And if you wanted to talk to me for some reason, it's going to be a couple of weeks, really. I'm just kidding. If you want to call in now, please do 202-521-1320. And again, quick heads up for folks, both Jamarl and I are going to be off the show this coming week. No Fault Lines next week, I'm sad to say. However, we will come back the week after that. Well, at least Jamarl will. I'm still on vacation. Then week after that, we're both back. So basically, one full week off, one half week off, with Jamarl doing an excellent job at the helm here. And then I come back and we both pick back up the pieces. Brief, I just want to go back into this for a second, Jamarl. We talked about this yesterday. I'm going on a Pacific Northwest biking trip.
Right.
You're going to Turkey and Georgia.
Yes.
You're not going to Nagorno-Karabakh,
no,
the war-torn region in between Armenia and Azerbaijan, like you were talking about. But I don't think Aisha would be very chill with that, if I'm being honest.
No, I don't think she would be. Well, the thing is, when I initially planned the trip, I was just going by myself. Aisha was supposed to be going somewhere with her family members for her birthday. And, you know, after I got back from Switzerland, I was like, you know what? I feel great. I'm going somewhere else. And so at that point, I had booked the ticket to, I was considering Nagorno-Karabakh, or the very least Armenia and Azerbaijan. But eventually, it kind of ended up with Georgia, and it ended up with Cappadocia, and it ended up with Istanbul. And like I said, Cappadocia was her birthday gift. She's always wanted to go. And so that's kind of the way to kind of petered out. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
That'll be awesome.
When do you leave, by the way?
I'm leaving this Saturday.
Okay.
Like some 5 or 6 p.m. tomorrow evening. My brother and I are actually, my brother works at a bike shop. We're bringing our bikes with us, of course, because we're going on this long bike trip.
Yep.
And I'm going to drive down to his bike shop tonight. We're going to pack them up into empty bike boxes, take them back in Ubers to our house. Then we're going to take them out to the airport tomorrow. There's this whole fiasco. Well, it's just a hassle because we have bikes and you need to figure out how to do them. Although, a quick heads up, some airlines specifically, I don't want to advertise which ones, some airlines have dramatically better deals for anybody who's like thinking about bringing a bike on a plane. Some of them it's like $150, others it's like $30. So my brother booked the tickets for us. He did a great job booking it, and he chose one of the ones that cost $30.
Very cool.
Definitely something to keep in mind if you're planning a trip like this.
That is good to know.
Yeah.
I mean, the price of airline tickets are often weird by themselves. I mean, just the notion that you could be sitting beside somebody whose ticket could be half the price or twice the price.
Yep.
And, you know, all of those people are just all throughout the particular part of the airplane, depending upon when they got the ticket, the day they got the ticket, the hour they got the ticket, all of these other things that come into play. So, yeah, it's good he was able to get a deal on that.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
We've got a caller, and we've got room for more. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Brave calling in from ATL. I believe that's I know that's Atlanta. Brave. How is it in Atlanta right now, and what's on your mind this morning?
Atlanta is beautiful and dangerous as always. So, two points I want to raise there. But a quick question: Is someone going to be subbing for you guys next week, or you guys are going to just be gone and there's no show at all?
We're just off.
Yeah, because I think everybody's gone.
Everybody's gone. I believe producer Cordell is taking vacation. I believe Austin will be subbing in. He's not taking a vacation. He's subbing in for Political Misfits as a producer over on their show, if I understand this correctly. So yeah, Fault Lines is off, that to say, for that week.
You guys are messing up my morning routine. But
oh, man, I'm sorry.
I hope you don't leave us in the dust here, man. I hope when we come back, you're like, I've moved on, guys. But that's your choice.
So two things real quick. Kim Iverson did a video cover the story. Apparently the CDC director to come out and I guess admit to the fact they have been kind of skewing the data a little bit on this whole pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Yes.
Apparently the numbers they were actually pulling from to make that claim were from, I think she was saying January to May. I haven't had a chance to go and independently review the information. But
we mentioned this. In fact, I've mentioned this a few times.
Jamarl's been good on this.
Yeah. So, you know, back in May, because I was really annoyed by this. I didn't even see they were gaming the data for politics. That's all it is. It's basically, they've changed, it's like grading on the curve. So up until May 1st, ProPublica came out with a piece that basically said they stopped recording breakthrough cases for people that didn't end up in the hospital or didn't die. And it's like, what? When? It's like, and why are you doing that? And then they came up with some bogus reason for why they were doing it that they made no scientific sense at all. And it's the catch is it's a political choice. At the end of the day, they wanted the numbers to stay low. They wanted to keep the argument about the vaccinations uncomplicated. And so what they decided to do was, well, hey, the numbers can look lower than what they are if we just don't report the numbers. Basically pulling a Cuomo or pulling a Trump when he was trying to massage the data. The difference is they freaked out when Trump did it. Nobody said a word on this. Nobody said a word on this.
Right, exactly. She was leading off a little bit more. I'm familiar with what you cover in that part. The direction she was going in, or the portion of the story that she was going into, was more about how they were pulling the way they've been saying that, okay, the 97% of the cases in the hospital are unvaccinated, and then using that term, pandemic of the unvaccinated. Well, basically, and to your point, but going a little bit further on Kim's video, what they were doing, they were pulling the percentages of unvaccinated and vaccinated cases that were showing up from that time frame and presenting them unfairly, because clearly at that time, if you go back to January, they had just started rolling the vaccines out, if you remember,
right.
And so only certain people were able to get them at the time. So if you're pulling the numbers of hospitalized, of unvaccinated from that early time frame where most of America wasn't unvaccinated, and then you're using that time to say that now all of the cases, the majority of the cases are the unvaccinated, well, then that's a misrepresentation of facts, because you're not judging the cases by now, judging the cases by then, when clearly most people were unvaccinated. And then I'm throwing it out there for you guys to check the video out and check the story out, because it comes out, it's a little bit worse than, I mean, as bad as it is to say tracking those cases, it's even worse to say that you're using old data.
Yeah, it's not just that they stopped tracking, it's that they were using the previous data when it's completely invalid.
Wow. Wow, that's even worse. I mean, that is disastrous. I mean, you need accurate data if you're going to have any kind of appraisal of what you're going to do in policy-wise. I mean, it's just, it's just kind of a, is what it is thing. How do I plan my world, my life, or for that matter, how do you even make policy, or the various states, countries, hospitals, what the works, if you're not really getting real data, or they're screwing with the data for this kind of political effect? Yeah, I need to look at, I need to check out what you're talking about, but that sounds bad. I don't like it.
Yeah, please do, because to me, it's not about whether you should be vaccinated or unvaccinated. To me, the most important thing, and I'll leave it this out, I'm not worried about the other point. The most important thing is they're using that skewed data to turn people against each other, right? Vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And then you come back around and you find out that the data you were using was you were manipulating people to turn people against people to sell a vaccine. And that's it keeps on happening with them. They keep on having to admit that they were wrong or they're lying. So the science is not changing, the propaganda is changing.
Yeah, and that's aggravating.
By all means, yeah, I would love to get you guys' take on it once you get a chance to check it out. And I'll leave it there for other callers.
Thanks, Brave.
Brave, thank you for the call. We have Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on. What's going on?
Yeah, I just want to wish you both luck on your holidays, and I hope everything goes well for you.
Thank you.
Safe. And Jamal, I don't know if you know, there's a good, apparently, I think it's the Turquoise Mosque is in Turkey. Apparently it's meant to be absolutely amazing. Probably check that out.
We definitely will.
Keep an eye out for some local wines there in Georgia, that region of the world.
Well, my boss kind of gave me a heads up on a place to go to get some of the best, some really good stuff there. So yeah, I'll be bringing some back.
It has some of the oldest grapevines in the world, because there was a blight in old Europe which wiped out a lot of the vines, and so that region of the world has some of the oldest remaining vines in the world. So yeah, keep an eye out for there. And just quickly, so that's what I bring in. Wish you both luck. And also, I think this thing with the vaccine is becoming like a new deplorable sort of like, it's just going to be, soon it's going to be the great unvaccinated masses, and basically, they'll be excluded from everything, and they'll basically be treated by lepers in society. And I just think it's crazy. I think it's getting put to ridiculous. Like everyone has the right to get vaccinated if they want to, and those who don't want to get vaccinated don't have to. I don't see the point of vaccinating the entire Western world while the rest of the rest of the world remains unvaccinated.
Well,
I just don't see the logic behind how they're meant to stop variants.
Okay, so that's fair, right? I mean, and this is why they're getting us the side eye right now, like the countries around the world, because it's like, wait a minute, you guys are doing a booster, and most of the world hasn't been vaccinated. And you have this kind of problem where it's like, okay, let's say everybody in the United States, let's say you get your 70% vaccination. What does that have to do with the variants that are popping up in the other countries of people who are not vaccinated at all because they never got their original vaccination? And so it's like, yeah, you're going to try to create Fortress America, which didn't work the first time around. You've had the Delta variants coming from Peru. You had them coming from Europe. I mean, all over the place. So you being isolated in a particular country, even somewhere like Israel, right, wasn't entirely safe. Especially when the variants took place. You almost need to vaccinate the world in order to protect yourself. And they keep missing that somewhere along the way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just going to keep creating variants. You're creating a situation where your immunity is continuously being broken through, and you continuously have to get another booster. What are it going to be, 5 boosters? 6? Like, at a certain point, it gets obscene.
You almost sound like an anti-vaxxer there, Jamarl.
Yeah. Well, hey, you can call it that. But I think the issue is more so actually the opposite. I think they should vaccinate the world. I think they should get rid of the drug companies, stranglehold on being able to take the chains off and to let other countries do it and everything else. Yeah, and people should be able to vaccinate it. I don't think America is safe if everybody else is ill. I don't think it works that way.
Yeah. At the very least, I think, in cities where they're preventing people from entering unless they're vaccinated, they should be giving them other options like they do in other countries in Europe,
yeah.
In Italy and Germany, like we've talked about,
yeah.
Where you can either have recovered naturally from COVID, in which case you were presumably at least somewhat immune to it in the same way that you would be with the vaccine, or you have negative PCR test recently. And I get that's a hassle. It's a hurdle that you're asking people to jump through. But
vaccine is a hurdle. Mask is a hurdle.
But we're in a crisis, at least. Anyway, one last thing, Michael, thank you for the call. Blue Mosque, turquoise mosque that you brought up in Istanbul, I hadn't seen that before. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Just the geometric archecture of various mosques.
It's like supposed to be 13 minutes away from the hotel.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Go check it out. Seriously.
No, it's close. We're like literally in the middle of Istanbul.
That's awesome. All right, let's go to a break. We're going to be coming back with Garland Nixon on the other side of this one, talking Afghanistan and more. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We've been having this conversation about Afghanistan and specifically, at least today's show, on Biden's press conference in response to the suicide bombing that has taken place in Kabul. In fact, the 2 suicide attacks. And as we said earlier, there were 95 Afghan civilians. The number went up from 70-something to 95, and 13 American soldiers, service members. This created a situation where Biden was basically getting hit with questions left and right as if it was his fault somehow. And Biden, to his credit, stood his ground, explained his point. And yeah, this is the case where we actually, on the show, I believe, agree. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Garland Nixon. Garland Nixon is a Sputnik political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour, Monday through Friday at 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. Garland, thank you for joining us on short notice.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me, guys.
Absolutely. So I want to play a clip from Joe Biden's speech. We played this morning. I'm going to play 2 of these. And I want you to give me your take on this, because these guys are hitting Biden, and, he's getting criticism from the left and the right. And to be fair, he was getting criticism all the way through because they didn't necessarily want him to leave, and they wanted him to take the magical choice of basically staying in perpetuity. Biden, to his credit, stuck to his guns. Let's play the first clip.
To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay. I will defend our interests and our people with every measure at my command.
He has to say that on some level. It's aggressive, it's rough, but Biden is stuck in this kind of political space where American service members has just got killed. And they got killed in pursuit of a choice and a decision that Joe Biden made to basically pull us out during this time frame. So yes, people have taken issue with that. And yeah, it's aggressive, it's over the top. I don't even know how you're going to do anything like that, but fair enough. Let's go to the next one real quick. Let's play the next.
Said the buck stops with you. Do you bear any responsibility for the way that things have unfolded in the last 2 weeks?
I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened of late. But here's the deal. You know, I wish you'd one day say these things. You know as well as I do that the former president made a deal with the Taliban that he would get all American forces out of Afghanistan by May 1. The reason why there were no attacks on Americans, as you said, from the date until I came into office, was because the commitment was made by President Trump: I will be out by May 1st. In the meantime, you agree not to attack any Americans. That was the deal. That's why no American was attacked. Imagine where we'd be if I had indicated on May the 1st I was not going to renegotiate an evacuation date. We were going to stay there. I'd have only one alternative: pour thousands of more troops back into Afghanistan to fight a war that we had already won relative to why the reason we went in the first place. As I've said 100 times, terrorism is metastasized around the world. We have greater threats coming out of other countries, a heck of a lot closer to the United States. We don't have military encampments there. We don't keep people there. We have over-the-horizon capability to keep them from going after us. Ladies and gentlemen, it was time to end a 20-year war. Thank you so much.
We get into her. Garland, I agree with him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, a couple of things. So on the first part where he said, we will not forgive, we will not forget, things of that nature for those who attacked us. I'll be honest, my first thought, inclination was to say, I wonder if the Libyans and the Iraqis feel like that. I wonder if when you say, hey, you killed 13 Americans, we will not forgive, we will not forget. And I mean, this is just my immediate response is, we killed 1 million Iraqis. I wonder if the countries invaded and slaughtered people, the people that we've starved in Syria and Venezuela, I wonder if they all feel like we will not forget. Now, that being said, I know that Joe Biden had to say that cowboy John Wayne stuff because of the pressure that he's under. And the next thing my thought was, the United States is in a bad condition when Joe Biden is the dove in the administration.
Yes.
Who's got a history as a neocon. We're stuck with nothing but the hawks and the ultra hawks. The ultra hawks are in Congress, the ultra hawks are in the media, and Joe Biden now is a dove in this operation, which means our country, when it comes to foreign policy, is off the rail and it's over the top, and we have to listen to madness in the media every day when someone says something as simple as, perhaps we shouldn't occupy a country anymore. And the media doesn't focus on the last 20 years of occupation and disaster. They simply say, well, leaving is horrible. So now what we're going to get is this. If Joe Biden or anyone else says, well, perhaps we should leave Iraq, they're going to say, we can't. Look at the disaster that happened when we left Afghanistan. We can never leave anywhere because it's such a disaster to leave. It's not a disaster to occupy. It's a disaster to leave. That's what we're going to get from the media from now on.
Well, It'd be a damn shame, but I think you're right. We were talking about something earlier, and I want to go to you on this, Garland. Jamarl and I'm not sure about this. I kind of wavered on it. But the idea that with the attack yesterday, both the Taliban and our armed forces over there were victims. We were both victims of a common enemy. The real terrorists, the real threat, arguably, ISIS, ISIL-K. And again, we were talking about this yesterday with Scott Ritter and with Mark Sloboda. We have been working with the Taliban to fight this group, somewhat secretively, not truly secretively, but it hasn't been getting a lot of media attention. But do you see this potentially opening up a space for the media to pivot on the Taliban, and instead of painting them as, the worst terrorists, and I don't like the Taliban, but they're not the worst terrorists, instead of painting them that way, like, okay, maybe these could be useful collaborators in the fight against the real threat, which is ISIS, ISIL, the spreading attempt to create an Islamic State, just potentially very dangerous thing. Do you see that potentially happening, or do you think the media doesn't want it? What's your take on it?
No, I don't see this happening, and here's why. Because what you're talking about is, what's referred to as realpolitik, right? What you're talking about is practical politics. What Russia and China and Iran and some of the other countries in the area are doing right now. They may not be thrilled with the Taliban, but they're saying, look, they're going to be in charge of the country. The likelihood is we'll have to deal with them from a practical, pragmatic perspective. We're going to have to deal with them. So let's see how we can do it and to the best of our advantage. Real politics. The U.S. doesn't do that. We are caught up with these neocons who simply come up with narratives that fit their worldview. So our media doesn't do that. Our media comes up with narratives that fit the worldview of their corporate military industrial masters and of the intelligence community masters. So no, real politics is not an option anymore in this mad empire. It's what narrative do we need to push whatever argument that we need, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. H.R. McMaster was on CNN literally saying that the Taliban and ISIS and ISIS-K, who don't like each other, were working together now. Wow. Before they said Iran, and remember Iran and Al-Qaeda was working together, Saddam and Al-Qaeda. It doesn't matter. The cats and dogs were working together. Sheep and wolves are working together. It doesn't matter. They have to fit their narrative. So unfortunately for all of us, realpolitik is not an option in the mad empire.
It's not even realpolitik. I mean, that's either they're radically incompetent or radically dishonest. It's one or the other, and it could be a little bit of both. I mean, but you're absolutely right about the narrative thing. I mean, the Taliban has been fighting ISIS-K and these other groups, right? The United States, I mean, and this is kind of where the idea came from, where, enemy of my enemy is my friend, that type of stuff, where no, it's still considered terrorists, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a mutual interest in trying to get out of the country and to secure elements of the country. The media seems to be so out of touch with reality on this, because even though they're attacking Biden, they're not necessarily placing what they expect him to do. Meaning, it doesn't seem like they're entertaining reality in regards to the options that are available to Biden in this situation. They are acting as if we should stay forever from a 20-year war where we spent $3 trillion with hundreds of thousands of lives lost. And their thing is, well, leaving is hard. Leaving is hard. Yeah, but what do you expect? I'm just saying, leaving is hard. It's like, yeah, that's not a policy, nor is that helpful. Do you think this is going to have lasting damage on Biden? I think that's one of the other interesting questions. Like, the American public wanted Biden to leave. Fair enough. The American public did not necessarily like the way this looked when he was leaving. So again, fair enough. But to put it in context, 3,000 Americans have lost their lives and 12 lose their lives on the way out the country? The media hadn't really talked about this for the last 20 years, and all of a sudden everybody is an expert? Like, it's astonishing.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, too. Our media, and I use that term guardedly, they really remind me they're just such operatives for the intelligence community and the military-industrial complex. And I say their actions remind me of our foreign policy in that all tactics, no strategy. So they wake up one day and they're just constantly putting out fires. Oh, what happened? Oh, Biden wants to leave. Oh, quick, we gotta go into freak out mode because Biden wants to leave. There's no in game or strategy ever. There's no we'll do this and next we have to do that. It's like the U.S.'s foreign policy. We've got to go confront China. Really, what's our in game with China? I don't know. We're going to send more ships today. And that's why I say, they're just operatives. It's, we use the word media. They are nothing but operatives for our intelligence community, and their tactics without strategies method of putting out the daily fires just reminds me so much of, it's the perfect, I'm using this word wrong, but the personification of the U.S. foreign policy.
And we're going to go into a brief break. We're joined by Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of The Critical Hour. That's a show airing here on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. By the way, follow Garland on Twitter at Garland Nixon. Also check him out on Facebook and, of course, on YouTube. We'll be coming back with him on the other side of this break. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're joined with Garland Nixon. Garland Nixon is a Sputnik News analyst. He's co-host of Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik. Garland, something happened over last night. The Supreme Court basically ruled that Joe Biden's extension on eviction bans was basically unconstitutional, or maybe that's not the right word for it, but basically that it wasn't allowed. And so they basically ended the ban. Now, this wasn't a full court. These guys were on some kind of temporary recess or something to that effect. But either way, there were enough conservatives on the bench to basically say, you weren't supposed to do that. You didn't have the power to do that, putting millions, once again, in prize. What do you think about that? The thing is, and I think I have two pieces of mind for it. Part of me feels like using COVID as a way of trying to keep people in their homes feels weird to me. And it seems like it's kind of it's like a fig leaf of doing something as opposed to doing it in the typical way you would think they would do it through legislation. By the same token, if you don't think you can get the legislation through, you try to do whatever you can to accomplish your objective. Both of these cases at this point seem to be problematic. What are your thoughts?
A couple of things. My initial thought is, the Democrats did this when they went through all of that crap in 2016 to rig it for Hillary Clinton and lost to Trump, and they didn't try to push Merrick Garland through and blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on. But they created this environment. They can't argue that they didn't have a hand in creating a very conservative Supreme Court. So this is backlash from their political behavior, working to maintain power for the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. That's number one. Number two, when this moratorium thing ends up, they've got a big problem, and the problem is the U.S. our government, our empire focuses all its money, all its effort, everything is focused on foreign policy. And, that's why empires fall, because eventually basically your home just falls apart around you while all your money is going out in the world for the empire. So they're going to be forced to look at internally at an unmitigated disaster. One of the things you got to think about this moratorium, and this is what, from my experience of spending a lot of times in the court, my first thought is this: your courts will collapse. How in the world can you have, say, Washington, D.C., say any jurisdiction, right, and they can do X amount of evictions a day. Let's say they can do 20 evictions a day. Let's say 25 or 30 evictions a day, 50 evictions a day, whatever. Let's say they can do 50. and you got 20,000 evictions. It will collapse your court system. Your court system can't possibly handle that number of evictions. It pushes you into failed state status because you've got all the other things going on in court, but the court is overwhelmed. Some of these, I can know some counties where there'd be a clerk of the court and there's a dozen people working in the court. How are they going to handle thousands and thousands of evictions? So you'll have an environment, but whereas you've got all these evictions, A, they can't get through the court system, so the court system is locked up and collapsed. And B, if they do, you have by estimates up to 10% of the population of your country thrown out onto the street, which means you now have a failed state. So any way you look at it, it's going to force this country to confront the fact that it is an empire that completely ignores the needs of the people, of the citizens, as empires tend to do.
I agree in sentiment, and I also don't know how we should have done this thing. And I'll just pass it right back over to you because, I'm genuinely befuddled. We put a stop to people getting evicted from their houses because basically the government doesn't want them to go to work in a lot of cases because they're going to spread a sickness or contract a sickness when they're at work. So keep them at home, even if they're not bringing in money. You keep them in their houses. That's good. That's humanitarian. But of course, they're supposed to pay rents to landlords who are expecting those rents because they're having to pay off either a mortgage or they just rely on that for their income. And, especially if they owe the mortgage, then they don't pay the banks. And so you get this ladder of debts that if it's not, if that sort of tension isn't resolved in the system, it spirals out of control. It gets very quickly worse. And it is an immense humanitarian cost. Those are the facts of the situation. And confronted with those facts, I don't know what to do with them. But Garland, what do you think?
Well, okay, you're at the end of it. Here's what I like to use this analogy. You and I and Jamarl jump off a cliff, and we're in the air looking at each other, and then we say, what's the plan? There ain't no plan. We know how that ends. You're going to hit the ground. You had to come up with a plan before you jumped and all decide, guys, perhaps we shouldn't jump off the cliff. That's a plan. Once you're in the air, you're going to hit the ground, and you're going to face the results. The United States did this. It locked its citizens down. Unlike a lot of other countries, there's a lot of things we could dispute about the lockdown, and I would, but a lot of the countries that did that at least gave the people enough money to survive and to pay their bills. Being the capital of neoliberalism that the United States is, it couldn't possibly give its people anything because they may start expecting the government to do something for them in return for their compliance and paying tax dollars. So the U.S. created this disaster. So can it be fixed? They're in the air. They're going to hit the ground. I don't see a fix for this other than to pay the people's back mortgage and rent, which is, understand, about $70 billion. But keep in mind, the U.S. right now spends $120 billion a month into the market buying corporate bonds, corporations that don't even need that. So we can spend $120 billion a month into the market, but we can't spend $70 billion one time to pay these people's back rent. Again, these are the natural consequences of neoliberalism. That's how neoliberalism should work out. We're just getting closer and closer to hitting the ground.
And what makes this worse? There's $50 billion that's been allocated that hasn't been dispersed. It's around that number, give or take, but there's a huge number, like tens of billions of dollars in the various states, that because of the way the systems work in some of the places, the inability to get the money to the various people, some of the governors, especially in Republican states, aren't involved. You get the situation where even though the money is allocated, the money is not necessarily going to the people that need it. So yeah, it's horrible all the way around. Garland, you used to be a former cop, so I got to hit the story with you. South Dakota AG gets no fines, no jail time, and pedestrian death. Now, we spoke about this earlier. The Attorney General of South Dakota. Thank you. South Dakota Attorney General Jason Ravnsborg. Thank you. Jason Ravnsborg basically pleaded not guilty. Now, what he did was, while driving in the car at night, leaving the party, he hits somebody. He claims he thought it was a deer. He comes back the next day. Now, at the time, he's using his cell phone and he's lane changing, apparently around the same time when he hit the guy that was walking on the side of the highway. He comes back the next day. He finds that it's a person. It wasn't a deer. Now, keep in mind, this is overnight, like 16 hours later, where the guy's basically been lying in a ditch. The judge says, I'm powerless to do anything about this. 3 misdemeanors, slaps him on the wrist, no jail time, $500 fine for each count. And you have this thing where the dude doesn't even show up to court because he doesn't have to show up to court. The political connections that he has at his disposal. And I think my point earlier was these guys can lock up a ham sandwich if they get into their mind that they want to lock up a ham sandwich. And yet, in this case, utterly and entirely powerless. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, how does that work? That shouldn't be, that doesn't seem like it's something that should be okay. And even taking his word for it that he thought it was a deer, even that seems problematic.
Well, here's the thing. That is our court system. You know, I spent a lot of time in court, and I saw it every day. I saw one kid who gets, and this was back, you know, when weed was really, the illegal and all that crap. I see one kid, he gets caught with a little bag of weed. He comes in with his father and a good lawyer, and the judge congratulates the kid for having a good father and a good family, blah, 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 right? He gets nothing. You see another kid gets caught with a little bit of weed. He has nothing. He has a public defender who pleads out. And then, pleads out to basically pleading guilty and all kinds of other stuff. So that is the system that we have. Being the AG, not only is he a powerful man politically, but he's probably not broke and he can get a decent lawyer. And if you are, a person who has a little bit more money and you can get even a middle or upper middle class and you can get a lawyer, a decent lawyer, more often than not, you're going to walk. I mean, a case like that, based on what the facts of the case that you've given me, I could put together a pretty strong defense for the guy. Because keep in mind, in order to convict someone, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty. You get a jury full of people. You only got to convince one person, and they've only got to have reasonable doubt. It's not all that hard to put together for that case. Yeah, sadly, what he did, leaving the scene, which my suspicion is there was alcohol involved. And that's what I used to see as a cop time and time again when people would hit and run. More often than not, there was alcohol involved, and they knew that their options were, if I stay here and get arrested for drinking, I'm gone.
Right there.
And I'll take my chances with running and coming back, turning myself in the next day. I saw that time and time again. But that's basically my thoughts on it. It is the privilege of our court system, not just for politicians, but for those who can afford a good lawyer as opposed to the poor.
Well, and I think part of it is that South Dakota is partly an intensely corrupt political system locally because it's a one-party dominated state. You have Republicans in control of everything. And I have heard that the same applies on the other side of the aisle, at least in terms of graft and incompetence and, overspending on public projects and things. California, definitely a Democrat-dominated state. You could say the same thing about New York. It's like if you have a single party, whatever party that is, getting control of something, having a monopoly locally, that's going to give all these incentives for there to be no competition, for it to basically be rent seekers, people who get put in positions of power and then extract wealth from those positions of power, and then don't face any repercussions, don't have to deal with anything if they break the law, if they kill people, literally. I've reported from South Dakota before, and just intense local corruption. And this is completely characteristic. This is completely of a through piece with that. Any thoughts on that, Garland, before we close here?
No, I'm in agreement with you. There's that issue, but I think, I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you, but I do think, as I see it in this issue, I just see it as a matter of economic privilege, only because, based on what you said, I can see where a good lawyer, if you got a good lawyer in the case that you just gave me, you got a real good chance of getting off. But if you don't, you're toast.
Yes.
And he can afford it. And if it was some poor little schmuck that had no money, they'd be in jail for vehicular homicide.
And also, that's a point worth making and 100% true. And it applies more broadly. He's the attorney general. He has connections. But he's also in a class that can make itself more immune from this kind of thing than the vast majority of people. We got to close this hour out. Garland Nixon joining us, Sputnik political analyst, co-host of The Critical Hour. That's a show airing here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. Follow Garland on Twitter at Garland Nixon, and also check him out on Facebook and on YouTube. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back with our last hour this week and next week. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and more. Be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the disunited states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning, this week, and next week of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Jane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're surely listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Alrighty. Good morning again, everybody. It's August 27th, just past 9 a.m. Eastern, and we're getting into headlines here, getting back into the news at the start of this hour. Quick heads up, though. We're going to be off all of next week. Fault Lines is off next week. Jamarl's on vacation. I'm on vacation. Our producers are either on vacation or filling in with other shows. So all this next week, the show's off. The week after that, Jamarl comes back. He's going to be, I believe, solo hosting the show. You're probably just, flying alone, right? I don't think you're going to bring in another host.
No, it'd just be me.
We'll see. But yeah, probably just you. So folks, stay tuned for that. He'll be doing an excellent job helming the show, I'm sure. Then the week after that, everything resumes normalcy, hopefully. Goes back to normal. I come back and it's back to the races. But without further ado, let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, we've got about 187,000 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also 2,212 deaths reported yesterday. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 156,000 cases per day. That's an increase of 24% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 52% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 61% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 38,552,000 people across the United States, and it's killed 634,734 people here in the U.S. The country of India has given at least one COVID-19 vaccine shot to more than half of the eligible population there. The country's health ministry said it's ramping up its vaccination drive. India currently has around 30,000 new cases a day. To the extent the numbers there can be trusted, many speculated months ago that India's actual death count was far higher than has been officially reported. In national news, the Supreme Court yesterday ruled to block President Biden's extension on eviction bans. The court concluded that the administration did not have the authority to extend a moratorium imposed by Congress, and if they desired, Congress must specifically authorize that extension. Jason Ravnsborg, South Dakota's Attorney General, was fined in a killing case last September while driving home, maybe drunk. Jason Ravnsborg hit what he thought was a deer. He came back the next morning and, taking him at his word, discovered that the deer was actually a man. Whether he fled the scene knowing that it was a homicide or at least a manslaughter case, well, that's up in the winds of history. We don't know the facts there exactly, but nevertheless, he got away with a fine, no prison time. And again, this is the Attorney General, a top legal official in South Dakota, basically walking away effectively scot-free just with a monetary slap on the wrist. Allison Taylor of Michigan sued the city of Saginaw over 14 parking tickets she received. She argued that the chalk parking enforcement used to mark tires violates the Fourth Amendment. I'm going to have to... Can we call our 800 number and get our local constitutional lawyer on the line?
Search and seizure.
Violates the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure?
Yeah.
I'll get into it. A 3-panel judge ruled unanimously that Taylor was right and the practice was unconstitutional. So here's the thing. This is going to be fascinating.
That's great, right? All of these cars out here from here on out.
Oh, man. This is...
You're violating my rights, man.
Oh, my God.
Violating my rights.
I love America. The Great Resignation continues in America as the pandemic rages on. About 55% of Americans in the workforce say that they expect to be looking for a new job within 12 months. This occurs as the U.S. reached an all-time high in job openings at the end of June with about 10.1 million positions. 56% said flexibility was the most important reason why they were looking for a new job. Next was better pay and more job security. Although I want to come back to this, flexibility is, like you were saying, people got used to working from home.
Yeah.
And they really liked it. At least some of them. In international news, yesterday 2 explosions and gunfire erupted outside of Kabul's airport. 95 Afghans and 13 U.S. servicemen have lost their lives, although from what you were saying, the numbers bumped up to 132 or something.
Yeah, so let me see. The latest report, this is from Afghan... Okay. The CBS news journalist in Afghanistan, breaking death toll from Kabul airport attack jumped to 170 people. including 32 men, 3 women, 3 children, and the identity of 132 unidentified or unidentifiable. I guess they were mangled.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's brutal. That's terrible. We've been talking about this throughout the morning. We'll be talking about that again in a couple of minutes with Margaret Kimberly. In response to this, President Biden stated that the U.S. will retaliate. He said, quote, "We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay." We've played that clip a couple of times this morning, and we'll probably play that again with Margaret, although we'll see. But it's about what I just said there. The attacks are believed to be committed by ISIS-K, with whom we have been working to fight. We've been working to fight them with the Taliban, basically, for over half a decade at this point. So interesting sort of turn of events here as we're withdrawing, and the withdrawal has been bungled almost completely. On the attack, former U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6 member stated that it's time to, quote, "kill people and drop our stupid rules of engagement," end quote. U.S. officials in Kabul have provided the Taliban a list of names of American citizens, green card holders, and Afghan allies to grant them entrance into the Kabul airport. The move, which was designed to expedite the evacuations, is being slammed on both sides of the aisle as giving a militant group a quote-unquote kill list. Although, of course, the purpose is exactly the opposite. But if they wanted to, it really depends on whether or not they're going to use it to kill people. Or it's like a save person list, a don't kill list. Yeah. I don't know, You're just giving them a list, really. And it's up to them whether or not they kill people with it. I mean, seriously, that's how we're portraying it. But
Yeah.
Anyway. In tech news, China is implementing new rules to tech algorithms in their country. The restrictions target recommendations to users across multiple platforms and aim to forbid practices that, quote, "encourage addiction or high consumption," end quote. The U.S. has attempted to implement similar rules in the past with little success, but we'll see how well the CCP does with this one. A 12-year-old coder is set to make more than $400,000 by trading NFTs for 2 months. Benjamin Ahmed began coding when he was 5 years old by watching his father. He has since turned it into a passion and a lucrative income source. I want to come back to this one, too. In Earth and Science news, about 14,000 firefighters continue to battle strong and growing blazes in California. More were sent out after Thursday saw the start of a new fire in the Sierra foothills. And again, fires burning there for months now. We've been talking about those. With that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So you mentioned this one last hour, the NFTs, the non-fungible tokens that this 12-year-old has made $400,000, set to make more than $400,000 by trading over the last couple of months. For one thing, I want to look into it more. You don't necessarily need to code all that much to make NFTs or to trade them or to profit from them. He's in the community, I'm sure, because he's a cool, smart kid who got into coding and stuff. Yeah. But then there's also this question. Now, maybe this is just cope, Jamarl. Maybe I'm taking the copium. I'm coping with the fact that I didn't make hundreds of millions of dollars in profit from Bitcoin because I knew about it early on. I was one of those people who was like, when it was like much less than $1, and I think it might have been like a penny or something.
You could have made a killing.
Dude, you don't even know. I haven't done the math just because it would depress me. But the point is, at the time, I remember myself thinking, this isn't a way to make money. Even if this is popular, I don't want to do this because what kind of human being, what kind of man would just make money by investing? I want to work for it. You know what I mean? That's gonna be good for my soul. And so that was what I did then. I was absolutely insane.
Making the money doesn't stop you from working.
I know.
You can still work.
Dude, if I had a time machine and you had a megaphone, I would let you use that megaphone through the time machine and I would treat it as the voice of God. My point is, that was my cope at the time, is my cope since then. But still, what are NFTs exactly? Literally, I'll explain just briefly what they are. Effectively like an image or a piece of artwork that has a sort of unique token, a unique identity, and that somebody can purchase to prove that they have complete ownership of this thing. So it's like they're images. Different people have been creating images. People can bid on them. And basically at the end of the auction, somebody owns this image forever, immutably. Of course, they can trade it. You have contracts. It's not like they can't resell it to somebody, and people are constantly trading them and making money, and some are certainly losing it. But what are they trading? Pixels, bits, an abstract representation of an image? It's nothing. It's less than poppies. Poppies, the poppy boom, the famous boom, at least there was a physical material quantity. This isn't even supposed to be a currency like Bitcoins and cryptos, right? What is this?
Yeah, it's very weird, right? I mean, but is there a difference between, let's say, a picture from a non-fungible token versus a picture that I'm holding in my hand? And the person can say, well, yeah, you're holding it in your hand. It's a thing. But technically, it's just paint, color, lines drawn in a particular way where your brain can add a certain context to it. Isn't the other thing the same? With the one exception is that when you lose power, the thing goes away.
Yeah.
Like but does the power part make the difference? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer to it either. I don't know.
You know, it's like I have a cup. Great. I can use this cup for various things. Yes. It has use value. Okay. If I have a picture of a cup. All right. Well, that's a little bit different. I can't use it for use value. By the same token, how am I using the Mona Lisa other than just looking at the Mona Lisa?
100%.
So it's we're in a weird time. That's all. It's the adding electricity to something. But then you can make a case that says, well, look, electricity is so endemic at this point, meaning it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, that it's kind of a given in regards to operations. So your chances of that token being something matters.
And at the end of the day,
it's just weird.
Here's another side of this. At the end of the day, it reminds me of the GameStop, the GME frenzy earlier this year. One of the biggest stories this year, even though we've quickly moved past it. I could go into why people might disagree, but I would argue that's a huge, huge event in financial history. It's like, in some sense, doing what they did, which is crazy speculation on this random stock, was throwing up a massive middle finger at the financial establishment, which through hedging and, various financial practices does very similar things on a constant basis. Yet because they're already rich, that's normal and nobody pays attention to it. And yet it's when the hoi polloi, the random members of the public who are like looking to make a killing here, when they start to get into it, that's when the outrage comes in. The same thing applies here. So many of the complex derivative structures of the stock market that are being traded on a constant basis, those aren't real. Those are less real than the NFTs in their own way. You can't even represent them in a picture. Why do you? It's a function, a mathematical function. It's the more abstract, which is
a thing.
And so on the one hand, I kind of can't blame them. They're just playing the game in their own way, playing the game at a level they can play it, and apparently making a killing doing so. On the other hand, the whole structure is corrupt. I don't like any of it. And so it makes me cynical. But
at least somebody buys it, I suppose. I mean, like, it is somebody wants it. Otherwise, I don't think anybody will buy it. And so it's still something to it, even though it's, I don't know. It's very weird. I get the weirdness of it. I do get it. It's this difference between light versus a thing, and whether, light is a thing, a picture, and all this other stuff. No, it's very interesting. I think it's pretty fascinating.
Absolutely. We have an update here. Antoine Gilmore is the name of the man who was killed in the shooting the other night. Remember a couple of days ago, folks, we were complaining about this. I believe this was on Wednesday. I was complaining about it really because everybody was late. Like the whole city was shut down. And it was like a ghost town around here. It turns out I'm myopic and a guy got killed. That was the cause of this. Black man, I believe he was 27 years old, name of Antoine Gilmore, sleeping in his car, has a pistol in his shorts. Cops come up. They see that he's asleep.
Foot on the gas.
Foot on the gas.
Foot on the brake.
Foot on the brake.
Foot on the brake.
But basically, cops come up. This dude pulled over on the side of the road, basically in a roadway, asleep. Asleep somewhere he's definitely not supposed to be. They go up to the car, see that he's asleep, see that he has a pistol in his waist, basically, inside his waistband or whatever. They go back to their cop car. They bring over a ballistic shield, and body cam footage has been released this morning. Basically, he is shot dead. He wakes up in a panic, pulls the gun on them from what I hear. I haven't seen this video. And then they shoot him. Now, this new body cam footage has come out. Very quick release, by the way, of the body cam footage, which is interesting to note. I haven't seen it yet. What's the word about it?
All right. So it says the 5.5-minute video released. He's in a black BMW. The cop, they're creeping on the side of the car at this point, ballistic shield. And they made the point of saying, I don't know he says it's very difficult to see through the lens what the officer in this case that fired, it's very difficult to see what the officer is saying. What did he perceive to be a threat at this point? Conti says, noting the department did not yet have a statement from the officer. Okay, why don't you have a statement from the officer? This has been multiple days. They creep up with the shield. Somebody says, I can't see his hands. Then the car suddenly moves forward. Officer starts shouting, don't move, police. And then they start firing 10 rounds into the person. Now, keep in mind, put this in context. He's probably wearing a bulletproof vest. He has a bulletproof ballistic shield, and yet he dumps 10 bullets into a guy that just woke up. And the catch becomes, are you telling me there is no process, there's no capability of these cops, after putting their heads together for a period of time, to get that guy out alive? He was asleep. And it's like, if you can't even get a sleeping person out alive, what does it mean for everybody else? I mean, for God's sake. It says the gun was found in his waistband. Conti said he didn't know if Gilmore removed the gun from his waistband. It remained there. after the shooting, meaning he never touched the gun.
That's brutal.
He never touched the gun.
That's...
MPD bars officers from firing at moving vehicles. That's the other thing. The car lurched forward. Don't move, police. Bop, 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 bop. 10 times. So they apparently pumped bullets into a guy that apparently didn't touch the gun. They shot a car that apparently wasn't supposed to be moving because, moving cars. And they were so radically incompetent that they couldn't figure out how to get a person who was asleep in his car out alive, despite the fact that they huddled together, had enough time to get a ballistic shield in order to throw rocks at the car, scream on a megaphone. You could come up with some way of doing it. I think also was like, put your car in front of his so he can't go anywhere. Figure out a way so the guy doesn't wake up in a panic and you don't shoot him in a panic because he woke up in a panic. I mean, for God's sake, some of this stuff is just foreseeable. But for them, magic. They don't get it.
The part of what you said that sticks out to me for some reason is if this dude was asleep.
Yeah.
If they killed a dude who they just woke up from sleep.
What is everybody else?
What is everybody else?
Yeah.
That idea does sort of strike me in a very deep way because I can see different sides of this. Austin saying put spikes in the road.
Or even that.
Sorry. Cordell saying put spikes in the road. I don't want to misdistribute it.
Even that.
Put spikes in the road, that kind of thing. Put some
Even if you think it's too far, it's better that he comes out alive.
Yeah.
Because it's, honestly, if it's me, they got the ballistic shield. Why did they get the ballistic shield? Because he figured there's a gun, there's a threat. I need to do something about the threat. Meaning they understood that with this guy wakes up in a panic, he could actually reach for his gun because he just woke up in a panic. And yet, for whatever reason, it didn't influence their opinion enough for them not to put 10 bullets in the guy. And again, I keep pointing out, the gun was found in Gilmore's waistband, the police said. Conte said he didn't know if he ever removed the gun from the waistband. It remained there after the shooting. Didn't even pull the gun.
Yeah.
Great.
It's brutal.
Absolutely great. That's aggravating, man. That's so aggravating. Because it's like, look, I can forgive somebody making a mistake, like where it's the person pulled a gun instead of a taser. I hate it. I think it sucks, but I don't think that person maliciously tried to murder somebody. I can even forgive these split-second things where it's happened so fast, where it's like the person makes a choice, and the choice might be wrong, but you can kind of get where they made it. This is different to me. You had time. You had space. This wasn't a quick gunfight. This wasn't a split-second thing. You had time to figure out and plan, how do we keep this guy alive? And despite having all of that time to plan, the guy is asleep.
Yeah.
Can't make it out alive. They can't figure out how to get that guy out alive. I mean, for God's sake, what is it? I mean, what about other hostage situations? Should we just forfeit life when dealing with a cop? I mean, it just seems insane to me that this is okay.
I might want to come back to this.
Yeah.
Depending on what we get up to at the end of the hour, because we're a little bit over time. We got Margaret Kimberly, of course. And so I want to make sure we get to her. But depending how we do it at 9:45, I might want to come back to this. And of course, that's when we'll be taking your calls too. In the meanwhile, and right now, we're going into a break. We're going to be coming back with Margaret Kimberly, guest on the show, friend of the show, longtime friend of the show, senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report. We'll give you the rest of her info. Real quick, go check her out on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog right now. But you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with Margaret on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys in the area, you can join us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We've been having this conversation about Biden, and I want to get into some of the domestic politics around what has just taken place in Afghanistan and what effect this is going to have on Biden here in the United States, seeing as it seems that media and many of the political space are very angry at Biden for actually leaving a 20-year, $3 trillion, 100,000 lives lost war. To have a conversation about the domestic politics of it all, we're joined with Margaret Kimberly. Margaret Kimberly is a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial, Black America, and the Presidents. Margaret, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. It's nice to be back.
No, absolutely. I'm glad to have you back. Joe Biden is pulling out. He's sticking to his guns. We're leaving on August 31st. And whatever I may think of that, I think some of the stuff has been somewhat calamitous. I definitely agree with the decision, and I definitely agree with him sticking to his guns on this very specific point about leaving. How have you framed the way media, other politicians have not just ignored the war for all of these 20 years, but all of a sudden are war experts, not just war experts, angry, viciously so, at Biden for pulling out? How do you frame that event and Biden's resistance against it?
Well, part of the problems is optics, and it's pretty clear if we didn't know already, optics count. The media had been ignoring Afghanistan for all these years, as you point out. Had there been a clean withdrawal with no problems, I don't think it would be much of an issue. But I think the mishandling, it clearly was mishandling, the departure from Afghanistan, that they needed Bagram Air Base in order to take people out. Allied nations are angry with the U.S. because their people can't leave from Kabul that ordinarily they would be helping. The U.S. citizens, they're not even sure how many are there. It's something like 1,500, they think. The fact that the airport isn't secure, all of these things have led to a situation that does not look good. And I think that helps to bring out what is unfortunately always beneath the surface in this country, American exceptionalism. The U.S. can do anything it wants, anywhere it wants. Even when you're in a country for 20 years and occupy and kill thousands of people, it's still the right thing to do. So I think their inability to manage this well brought all this up. And, of course, now all bets are off now that U.S. soldiers are among those who were killed in the bombing yesterday.
Well, I still get the feeling that he's leaving, though. I mean, Biden has been pretty clear that he's not deviating from the plan. And the thing is, I don't know what other – it just seems well, to back up your point, you're right, because it seems like I don't think they have any options outside of August 31st. They're acting as if Biden has agency that he doesn't have, and they're acting as if that the U.S. can just unilaterally act as opposed to having to work with the Taliban, who's basically the power on the ground. They just seem out of touch with reality. But like you said, the optics is the issue. Do you think this is going to have lasting damage for Biden going forward beyond this particular moment?
Well, I know the departure of U.S. troops doesn't mean the U.S. departing from the country. So it's there's an extra element of this. It's not just U.S. troops leaving, but the U.S. disengaging from Afghanistan altogether, which is something else that needs to happen. Will they just leave the country alone, or will this bombing be an excuse? This ISIS-K, I'd never heard of ISIS-K, but anyway, they say it exists. I will, for the moment, accept that it does. Are they going to pick sides? What are they going to do? As the Russians and Chinese, the countries who actually use diplomacy, imagine that, as they have made contact with the Taliban, the U.S. will obviously try to undermine that relationship. So there's two different things. It's the military leaving, and it's the U.S. really leaving Afghanistan. And this, Biden doing a bad imitation of George W. Bush, we won't forgive, we're going to retaliate, we're going to hunt you down. What does that mean? it means more drone strikes. It means more civilians dead. So I don't think this is really the clean break that is needed.
What do you think about Biden's move here generally? Because it seems like he has been, and Margaret, great to have you as always. It seems like he has been consistently the one playing the dove, which is extremely unexpected to say the least. But he's been doing it. He's been trying to get us out. And or just talking this morning, could we come together? Could the United States pivot on this to try to reconcile ourselves somewhat in the public eye with the Taliban and the fight against ISIL? Okay. But McMaster comments, we were talking with Garland Nixon last hour, H.R. McMaster said, ISIL-K and the Taliban are working together right after these events. He's clearly trying to get ahead of it and pivot and, reinforce that there are true enemy here. Biden has been trying to pull out, which is just unexpected for me. I mean, do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your thoughts on this in general? Margaret, it's surprising is my point.
Yeah, well, there are people who argue that the mismanagement was actually a sort of sabotage on the part of the military, that they did not serve Biden well in advising him how this should go because they never want to leave anywhere. The military-industrial complex, we have people making a couple trillions of dollars spent there. So these military people can't be taken seriously, frankly, or, trusted, in my opinion. I think I'm glad that the U.S. is departing. I was always afraid that they were departing so they could send troops somewhere else. My fear was always that now they felt free to stir up something with China if they took troops out of Afghanistan. So but those of us who are opposed to U.S. interventions need to be consistently opposed. The U.S. has to complete this withdrawal, not use it as an excuse to start something else with someone else somewhere else. That has to be our demand.
Were you surprised at how out of touch Biden seemed to be along this process? Like, at various points throughout the withdrawal, it seemed like he didn't necessarily know what was going on the ground. So at one point he would say Americans, any American get to the airport within a few hours. They found that wasn't true. He would make the point of this isn't going to look like Saigon. Well, found out that wasn't true. You even had this kind of odd situation where, the proclamations about the military strength. We have 300,000 troops and Air Force, et cetera. And it was like a sixth of the force. Like, it just seems like he wasn't necessarily in touch as things were going on, which made it look that much worse and that much more chaotic. Were you a bit surprised that he seemed to be more off hands on this?
I was not surprised. I mean, that was my impression also. That was my observation. But I wasn't surprised. I don't think Biden is on top of a lot. And if you look at his career, 50-year-long career, he's always been a hawk. So it's not surprising to me that he would not have asked more questions of the people who were responsible for carrying out his directives. He was also defensive. In his interview, he was like, well, that was a couple days ago. And, he just was mad that he was being questioned. So, yeah, he's out of touch. And, and I think it's because he basically thinks interventions are a good thing. But we shouldn't think that. And just a reminder, to their credit, the Washington Post did great reporting a year ago showing that we've been lied to for 20 years about Afghanistan and about the idea that the U.S. could, quote unquote, win and defeat the Taliban for all the reasons you mentioned, that Afghanistan doesn't really have an army. The fact that the U.S. is there means they're not independent actors, so their presidents have been U.S. puppets. Their supposedly 300,000-man army is not. So it's important to keep all of these things in mind. This has been a cluster F for 20 years. Yes. It's been deadly to the Afghan people, and we must always keep them in the forefront of our thinking on this.
Agreed on that. Agreed. And thank you for bringing it back to that point. I want to take us into a brief break here. And when we come back, of course, we'll continue the conversation. Margaret Kimberly joining us on the line. Glad to have her back. She's senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report, also author of Presidential, Black America, and the Presidents. Follow her on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog and find her work at blackagendareport.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back with Margaret on the other side of this short break.
lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Quick heads up, Jamarl Thomas just left the studio. He has to get up very slightly early. You know, busy day because he's leaving. I don't know if you heard Margaret, but he's taking this next week off, going with his wife for her birthday over to Turkey and then Georgia, and they should have a great time. Anyway.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. No, if he'd hung around, I probably would have tried to take the conversation there just because it's cool to talk about and it kind of puts you in the mindset of those things. But anyway, he's out of the studio. I am joined on the line, of course, by Margaret Kimberly. She's senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report, also author of Prejudicial Black America and the Presidents. Follow her on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog and find her work and read it at blackagendareport.com. Margaret, talking about Biden, I'm going to take a topic that Jamarl chose and I'm going to carry it. We'll see where it takes us. He posed this question: will the criticism of Biden last? In other words, we've seen in the past couple of weeks a turn by every entity on mainstream news, whether you're talking Fox, which is to be expected, or MSNBC and CNN, less expected. Everybody was hitting Biden on this. Everybody was hitting Biden on the absolute failure. And we were saying at the time, oh, the irony, or, oh, the things they'll hit him on. Okay, when he tries to pull out of a war, when he does anything to pull back, that's when they deem it worthy. Hitting him on that. When Trump, tried to pull out, they did the same thing. And when Trump bombed Syria, that's the only time they really applauded him. In other words, the trend of what the media supports is pretty obvious here. But is that temporary? Or do you think this criticism means something? Do you think there's been a turning point from the establishment's perspective, from the media's perspective on Biden? What's your take, Margaret?
Well, I think the corporate media are right-wing on these issues. They just are. They always take a dim view of the U.S. disengaging from anywhere in the world. But I think we should point out that's not what the people want. I think if you ask most Americans, the U.S. would have been out of Afghanistan a long time ago. That's something that people, it's one of the reasons Trump was able to win his electoral college victory in 2016. He spoke out against these forever wars, and most people are opposed to them. So that's the thing we have to watch out for, and our politicians are right-wing on these issues. The people aren't. It's just one of the ways in which the people are not properly represented by the media or by their elected officials. So I'm not surprised at this rightward stance that they have, but I think we always have to point out that's not representative of what the people want.
Well, I agree that's not representative of what the people want, and I think I get what you mean, but I also feel the need to sort of push back because I'm sure there are people in the audience who are like, "What do you mean right wing?" Trump. If you compared him to Hillary, Trump was the dove. Trump was the one who, despite pushing for more sanctions on Venezuela and despite rocketing Syria, it seems like he was pushed to do a lot of that stuff, and his inclination, his right, he, the Republican contender, he wanted to pull back. So taking that into mind, assuming you agree with me, and please correct me if you don't, is that really a right-wing thing, or is that just an establishment thing?
Well, the establishment is right-wing. I think that I agree with what you say about Trump's inclinations, about if he had been free to do what he wanted to do, his foreign policy would have been different in some. I'm not trying to paint him as the peace president by any means. If you mentioned the sanctions on Venezuela and Iran and leaving the Iran nuclear deal.
That too. That's a big one.
So there were a lot of different forces who had a say in those things, and Hillary Clinton was definitely a hawk. I mean, that's what she did as Secretary of State, had the charge to destroy Libya and to try to do the same thing to Syria. So the desires of the public when it comes to foreign policy don't really get a hearing, because that's not what people want. It's very strange how in our politics there are people who will turn to Trump because he said those things during his campaign, but Democrats who also feel the same way, they also feel pulled in another direction because of other issues. But the end result is the United States continuing to interfere around the world against the wishes of its people, who do not want 700. If you ask the average person, should $750 billion be spent on defense? It's something like 60% of our discretionary spending. Most people would say no, but we're told we don't have options. And look at what's happened in the last week. It was propaganda. There's no other word for it. Soldiers holding hands with little kids in Afghanistan. Look at this Afghanistan family trying to leave. What about the women who want to go to school? Everything. They used everything but the kitchen sink to try to make the case for the U.S. staying, or to make withdrawal seem like as if it was not a positive thing. That is what we're up against. These I don't know what word to use for this day. The elites. I'm not the establishment. There's so many things we could say, but they are the ones who insist on these involvements that the people don't want.
And the images that you were talking about, I want to get into one specific one that I saw making their rounds on Twitter, and I'm sure it was on Facebook too. The images naturalize the hierarchy of this relationship. They naturalize the sort of oppressive behavior. If you put an American soldier next to an Afghan child or an Afghan woman or whatever, and inherent in that picture, you can almost imagine drawing a little halo over the soldier's head, And he's clearly the sort of paternal dominant figure. I don't mean to get too into psychoanalysis, but my point is it makes it seem natural and perfectly okay for that to be the situation, even if you look at what's actually happening. Not only is that not representative of how many people we kill, but that's not at all, just us being there, us having that relationship. None of it's natural. The one I want to come back to, you were talking about different instances of this, sort of patronizing imagery. The one I'm thinking of, and it has resonance with the Syrian war, similar images back in the Syrian war too. It's like a soldier in full military garb with a child, I'm guessing an Afghan child, looking up at him, drinking from a water bottle that this guy is like water falling into the kid's mouth. Get that into your head. It's a weird thing. The question that people are asking is, why is the kid not holding the water bottle? Why are you staging this? It's theatrical. And I think you see what I'm saying. It sets us up in a mindset where we're willing to accept something that if you were to think about it with open eyes, if you were to see it, you'd be like, that's kind of weird and disgusting. Margaret, what do you think?
Well, it's, that's how they try to keep buy-in from the public. And there was something else we started to see in the last few days before the bombing story took over. Suddenly these people emerged defending Biden, saying it wasn't mismanaged and X number of people have been evacuated, and you can't criticize Biden because he's really doing a good job. So that was another piece of the propaganda. But that imagery is powerful. And of course, when you don't tell people how many Afghan children were killed by U.S. bombs and drone strikes, and the only image that most people have in their minds is, a child being given water, the implication being the kid was dying or something, then you can plant that seed that there was something positive about the U.S. presence.
Yes.
So the people on social media who suddenly leapt to Biden's defense, the creepy propaganda photos that all work together to try to protect him and to try to make the case that these interventions are positive.
Yeah, no, that's what it is, and it's the subtle natural propaganda that we live in. I want to come back to something you were saying a couple of minutes ago, which is the vast majority, 60%. Let's just start there. Most Americans, a supermajority of Americans, don't want us to be doing these kinds of things anymore. And it seems like many of our allies and much of the international community in general sort of ringed around us, orbiting us, whether we're talking Australia, South Korea, Japan, and the Pacific, of course, the European Union, various, proxy states and allied states around the world. They see our mistakes. They see the way we've bungled this. Jamarl and I have been talking for the last week about what are going to be the repercussions going into, 2022, into the 2020s. There's going to be a massive shift here. And I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, although hopefully not blindly so, that some leaders here in the States, some political figures are going to see there's a window of opportunity that we need to seize on in order to stop the imperialism thing, start actually solving American problems locally. There's so much progress to be made there. And so on the one hand, while this is all incredibly depressing, I'm starting to get a little bit more, there's room for something here. Do you see what I'm saying, Margaret? What do you think?
Well, I think so. There is. That's why it's incumbent upon us and people like us to continue to have a voice so that people don't think in these binaries. As long as people are deprived of this information and they think the only choice is, Afghan kids only survive because of the U.S. when the U.S. has killed little Afghan kids, as long as people as long as that's the only thing that they see, they won't move away from not even supporting, but acting as having the impression that there's two sides and it's more complicated. It isn't complicated. The U.S. needs to get out, and people in Afghanistan need to resolve their own problems.
Agreed.
Is the bottom line.
Well, that is the bottom line. And no, that's certainly I think the national message when it comes to that specific involvement. But I'm talking, I think you heard where I was going. I'm talking generally. I'm talking internally in the United States. I hope that we sort of capitalize on this. And I certainly see room for that on the progressive left. I'll be honest. I see some, inclinations for that on the right too. Not the establishment, certainly, but this sort of populist base, which is, of course, a dirty word, but I don't know. I want to come back to this for just a minute while we still have you. Any inclination of what that might look like, or if that's even possible, Margaret? Like a genuine sort of populist attempt to return America and the American leaders focus specifically on solving local problems instead of just getting involved in these endless things. Because we're going to get to this point where, we've been talking about it like this. This is an early canary in a coal mine. When Boris Johnson is trying to get Biden on the phone for 36 hours and he can't, and he's relying on Biden being on the phone to get UK soldiers and families back to the States, let alone UK allies in the form of Afghan nationals. He can't get them on the line. That's a huge disgrace. This is the early point where I think all of our allies in this situation see that we are fundamentally unreliable. This is the start of this process. I think this process, this sort of liminal period that we're in right now, might end. We get into another engagement, whether we want to go to war or we're looking to apply a big round of sanctions, a critical round of sanctions against somebody, whatever act it is. There's going to be a point where we try to do that, and the allies we're depending on decide not to go with us. We were talking about the Second Arab-Israeli War and the Suez Crisis, and how you saw the British Empire finally accepting, okay, they're not actually calling the shots anymore. And I guess my hope is in this liminal period, we'll see some political movement that sees what's happening and starts to make that shift possible. Any thoughts on that, Margaret?
Well, I did not know that he was hiding from Boris Johnson, because that's all that is. If the UK Prime Minister can't get the American president on the phone, the president's avoiding him.
This was last Monday. This was while all of this stuff was going on, while everybody was trying to figure out what was happening. 36 plus hours.
Oh, That's pretty funny. Britain, Netherlands, other countries couldn't get their people out because the U.S. had lost control of the airport. They literally couldn't land planes because the people hanging on to planes and so forth were on the runways. But that's not the way I see it. That's also a good thing. Anything that interrupts their ability to carry out these actions around the world. Britain is a partner of the U.S., starting with Tony Blair and going now through Boris Johnson, helping the U.S. in Iraq and Afghanistan. So if there's anything in these relationships that anything that harms the relationship, it's fine with me. But I think you are right. It will impact their ability to work together. But as a true anti-imperialist, that also does not bother me.
I hear you. And the same with me. That's the thing. And it's not because, we probably have slightly different views of this stuff, but I feel like there's a much better way for America to be that more fulfills its fundamental promises and, hopes and dreams, these kinds of things. There's like even a patriotic way to turn our back on imperialism. And I think specifically, if you're going to bring the right wing along with the left wing into some broad populist base that can provide a feasible and concrete political alternative to all of the dysfunction of the establishment, I think you got to do something like that. We got to go into a break, though, and we're going to be taking calls when we come back. Margaret Kimberly joining first Jamarl and I, and then, of course, just me in this last segment. Good conversation. Really good talking with you. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. Margaret Kimberly, senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report, also the author of Prejudential, Black America, and the Presidents. Follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. Find her work at blackagendareport.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we're going to be taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Quick heads up. I'm joined in the studio right now by producers for the show, Cordell Woodland, Austin Pelly. I hear they were getting into a fiery conversation in the control room over the story we were talking about earlier this hour.
Civil. Very civil.
So good, fiery but civil. Good thing. But you know what? First, we got a caller. I want to make sure we get him in while we still have him. Let's go to Tarif, calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on. What's going on? Oh, do we have him? I think we should.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, there we are. Now we can hear you, Tarif. What's on your mind?
Oh, my heart was pounding fast. Anyway, free Julian Assange, free Downer, free hands off Haiti, right? This is my point. Okay, September 14th comes around, and afterwards, I think things going to start really more changing. I'm not going to get too much into it. That's dealing with the elections in California. And, Larry Elder's win, which I think he might will. Joe Biden must pull out the troops out of Afghanistan. If not, what's going to happen is this. It's going to become United States' second Vietnam, because in Iraq, even though we had troops in Iraq and in Syria, the two armies in Iraq and Syria was being told not to hit U.S. troops by the Russians and Iranians. Taliban is totally different. Okay, they already gave a warning to the U.S. to pull out. So if we don't pull out after August 31st or September 11th, or whatever the deadline, then it would be bad for the U.S. You know, so we need to bring the troops home and put our money into our infrastructure.
Agreed. That sounds like what he's doing too. You know, based on everything he said yesterday, he seems pretty committed to that.
He have to. He have no choice. He can't listen to the chicken hawks around him. My last comment is dealing with the memorial yesterday with Kamala Harris visited on the 24th. She laid a wreath at a memorial in Hanoi, thinking that it was for John McCain. But it was a memorial for the anti-aircraft crews that shot down the plane of John McCain and other U.S. planes on that particular day in the 60s. And also, when she did that, they didn't even know that it was the same day of the birthday of the Vu Gajin Gat, which was the general at the time in northern Vietnam. So that broke a lot of that didn't send good image to the Vietnamese right then and there, you know, because they didn't even know that the memorial was dedicated to the people that was fighting against the U.S. It wasn't for John McCain, and also, you know, the other things dealing with the September. I mean, it was just crazy. So the U.S. foreign policy needs to change. We need to start working with people, start creating enemies. I think that might be one of the major themes of the show, Tarif, if I'm being honest with you. Tarif, thank you for the call. I'm going to, instead of taking more calls, we got producers in the room right now. I want to go into this conversation. We're talking about Antoine Gilmore. So Antoine Gilmore, again, setting this up for folks. You guys were late the other day. No problem. Yours, of course. Road was blocked off. Exactly. I'm calling you. You guys were all late. And I was pissed, dude. I'm just kidding. No, road was blocked off because a guy got killed by police for sleeping in his car, apparently had a pistol in his shorts. They shot him as they woke him up. And I know you guys have been having a conversation about the facts of this. And I want to sort of lead it. I want to let you guys get into it. Austin, we have you on the air all the freaking time. So I'm going to start with Cordell here. Let you make your point. And, you know, it's not like a formal debate format. It's a conversation, but.
Yeah, I mean, this was an instance where I would have really liked to see the police find a way to bring the guy in alive. Jamal touched on it earlier. It's like, dude, at this point, is that even an option when they go out there? I mean, the reports I read initially said that they took 20 minutes to come up with a plan, and the best plan that they could come up with was go knock on his window, and as soon as he wakes up and starts driving off, just shoot until the car stops, which they ended up doing. He ended up dying. There was no other alternative. I put spikes in the road. I mean, I came up with that in 3 seconds
just as an
after
idea.
Watching the video.
Yeah.
I mean, you have enough. It's at where that happened, I believe there's 3 intersections. You put a cop car on each intersection. You put the spikes there. I mean, how far can he go? It's just like, are you not even going to take the measures necessary to bring in the guy alive, or is it just shoot? I mean, and it's seeming to be that's more of the case. It's just we're just going to shoot and answer questions later, and it just can't be that way. There's clearly a disconnect with police in urban communities, specifically Black people. And I think we're seeing situations like this is a main reason why, is because they just don't seem to look at the alternative. You're there to be a de-escalator. I will make the argument that it seems like when they get there, the problem just goes from bad to worse.
All right. First response is violence, basically, and it's a major source of problems. Is, you know, makes perfect sense. We heard a lot of this last summer, and 100% right, as far as I can tell. But also, there's another side to everything.
Yeah. Well, first off, I want to preface it that I would love to see that guy come in alive too. Like, I'm not saying like shoot to kill if you're doing something bad. But first off, you got to see the video here, because it was miles different than when we talked about it the first day. I was like, okay, so they had to have come in, approached with 2 or 3 officers behind a tactical shield. They're all squatting, tap the window. Maybe I don't know, maybe not everyone was covered by the shield.
That's what you were speculating, to be clear. Yeah.
When we saw the video and after we heard it, I just turned to Cordell. I was like, Yeah, that's a little disorganized here. The dude with the riot shield was like on one side of the car, and there were like 3 officers on another side of the car. There was 2 behind. It was just so disorganized. The one officer was giving commands. He's like, knock on the window. And the dude goes, how do you want me to knock? And it's like, that was the plan. And I don't know if spikes would work because you can drive for a few miles or so on spikes. You slow down and stuff. But yeah, you could just easily box the car in. They got like 8 cop cars out there. Box the car in and then do it. Because, and something I want to clarify on air, they knocked on the door. He woke up. The car moves forward because he had his foot on the brake. So I'm assuming instinctually he lifted his foot off the brake. That's when I expected the shots to come. They didn't, like based off reading the story initially. They didn't, and then he stopped at the car again. So the car rolled forward a little bit, and then he stopped the car again, and then he started to register. There were police around. Then he tried to take off, and then they opened fire. And I'm not sure if we said this on air or not, but DC pretty much has a policy of not shooting moving cars. It can be a hazard to a whole bunch of other things. Say you kill the guy and he's driving, he could veer off into a sidewalk or something.
But then, hang on a second. So he's at a stop when he's asleep, of course. He has his foot on the brake. He wakes up, his foot comes off the brake. Maybe it moves to the gas pedal, starts moving forward. Then it stops again. And it's at the point when it stops that the cops start shooting. Am I missing something?
No.
here?
So they tap on the window and they say police, and he wakes up and instinctually takes his foot off, right? He rolls forward a couple feet, and they're saying stop police the whole time. They don't shoot. He hits the brake again. Now the car is fully stopped.
Yeah.
And they keep saying like police, open the door. This only is like 3 seconds, but it's enough for that way he can start to register. And then he goes foot off to the gas, goes forward, and then they start to shoot.
I see.
So he only gets like another foot or 2 in front of them, but he's trying to flee.
But was he aiming his car at a police officer?
No, they weren't in front.
It was open road in front of him.
They weren't
what
in front.
The actual F? He wasn't. They have his license plate. They have his info.
And let's be real. Apparently, he was wanted. He had a warrant out for him.
Something to take into account.
Right. So he's not. I'm not going to say he's not, but odds are he probably is going to try to get away. Odds are he wakes up and there's all these police cars right there. I mean, he's got a warrant. He knows what's going. He's got a pistol on him.
Yeah, keep in mind it's crazy hard to have a legal handgun in DC.
Yeah, that also comes to mind.
99% of them.
He knows he's going to jail. He knows he's going to jail. My thing is not. I don't want to force police to not be able to do their job. I want them to do their job better. That's really all this is here. The only option, it cannot be to kill. And that's really the point I really want to bang home. That's not the only option here. There's got to be other alternatives.
That should be like one of the last
we
options.
can see just by watching the video.
I hear you. Well, I wrote this down. I was like, because you guys, partly triggered by the conversation we were having the other day, but also just based on you guys saying it, you're talking about putting, I'm forgetting what the name of it is, the thing that blocks, they run over it.
The spike traps.
Exactly, spike trap. You're talking, Cordell, you're talking about a spike trap. Austin, you were talking about boxing them in. I was thinking to myself, that's way too much. But if he has a gun and they think he might be a criminal, I get why they might be willing to do that kind of thing.
8 police cars there.
They have 8 police cars there.
What are they all doing?
So it sounds like you guys almost kind of agree on this one. It sounds
honestly,
like
on this one,
you kind of come around.
Yeah,
Austin.
I pretty much agree. I think that it was very disorganized. I don't think that there was really a culture there of saying like, oh, well, we need to shoot him. There's no way he's coming in alive. But I'm also not one to say that it definitely wasn't there. I think it was poor organization, poor execution, and the officers need to get punished for it legally.
That's usually how it happens in a lot of these situations. I was drawing a blank, the girl that died down in the South where they just ran up in her house and shot her.
Yeah, Breonna Taylor.
Yeah, that's incompetence. That's just poor execution. A lot of the situations are poor execution, and we're just seeing it happen over and over again. At what point does it stop?
Guys, thank you for coming in to talk about this.
No problem.
Appreciate it. Cordell Woodland, producer for the show. Austin Pelly, producer for the show. I'm going to close it out here. Again, quick heads up, folks. We're off. All completely off this next week. Both Jamarl and I are on vacation, and Jamarl comes back the week after that. I come back a week later. I want to thank everybody for listening to us this morning. I want to thank Saul, engineer Saul. Happy birthday again to Andre. Hope you're having a good time where you are. Thank you to our producers. Thank you to Jamarl Thomas. Thank you to everybody for joining us and for listening to us this morning. Have a great day. See you again in a few weeks. Signing off. See you on the other side.